esteemed Eel Russian River Commission, much beloved group. What we are actually doing right now is taking a little moment with your patience to allow the representative from Lake County to make his appearance, Mr. Steele. Commissioner Gore tells us that he is a few minutes out. So if you wouldn't mind, I am going to delay it. If he doesn't show up in let's say 3 minutes, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Oh,
there he is. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June 8th meeting of the Eel Russian River Commission. We will now begin the process by having a roll call, and I'll ask Carla Van Hagen to do the honors.
Good morning. Commissioner Brown.
here.
Commissioner Gore.
Here.
Commissioner Steele.
Here.
Chair Fennell.
Here. Thank you. And that brings us now to approval of minutes from February 23rd. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that particular item? Any input from the public on that item? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. So the next item on the agenda is the Potter Valley Project Spring Release Strategy, RPAs B3 and D1. And Josh Fuller is here. Thank you, Josh, to give us that presentation. Josh is a fishery biologist with the NOAA Fisheries West Coast Region, California Coastal Office.
Testing. Yep. Okay. Thank you for having me this morning. I've been asked to give a brief update on what's going on with what we often call block water, but it's a little bit more than that, so I'll explain that. So Potter Valley Project Spring Release. Here's this quick photograph. Is there a pointer on here? Just to help people understand how operationally we do this. So here's the needle valve down below. And this is the water coming from the bottom of the reservoir, so very cold water. And this gate here, I believe is gate 13. This is releasing water from the top of the reservoir, which is typically warmer, especially this time of year. Just a little bit of background for folks that maybe are not totally up to speed on the RPAs and NIMS 2002 biological opinion. RPA B3 really requires PG&E to work with the natural resource agencies on surface releases. So that's independent of block water. That's where we can manipulate the temperatures to try to coax some monas out of the project area. And then RPA D1, so in fact, that's the block water. That's the 2,500 acre feet of water. That's at the discretion of the resource agencies to allocate and figure out how we're going to use that for spring release or possibly even summer. This year and the past 5 years, when we come up with these requests, it's always a conversation with Round Valley Indian tribes, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and obviously National Marine Fisheries Service. We jointly put a request together. We talk about all the scenarios, and then we do a lot of coordination with PG&E from an operational perspective and what the operators actually have to go through to implement whatever the strategy is going to be. Just a little background from what we saw in terms of adults this past year, and sometimes this influences how we structure our spring release strategy, depending on how many adults we get back, steelhead, Chinook. This past fall, we had 232 adult Chinook arrive, mostly females, which is good, and winter run steelhead, 169. Overall, numbers are still very low, but there's an uptick with Chinook this year. So our objectives for this year, and pretty consistent over the last 3 years, is to encourage and enhance the outmigration of juvenile salmonids out of the project area. We do this by increasing or manipulating temperatures. Our desired temperature range is between 14.5 and 16.5 C, so mid-60s. And studies have shown that are relevant to the project area and downstream, like around Tomkai, that 15 C really seems to be a really significant temperature cue for the juveniles to start heading out and heading downstream. So that's why we really try to get that target range without including like the surface releases and just coming from the needle valve. I mean, temperatures are really cold. They're like 10 C. So by adding that surface flow, we can really start to mix the water, get it warm, and we have seen a lot of evidence that the fish will start moving out once they hit that temperature range. And then with the flow variability, that's when we start using our allocated block water and how we do that and change the flows, pulses, whatnot to further push the fish out. So this year, where we are, we started May 15th with a ramp up, a small bump in the hydrograph, 60 CFS. Not like the spikes we've had in the past where, you know, we've had a pulse release of 500, 600 CFS. We're finding it's just that change in flow, a slight pulse, seems to help move the fish out. And then we can prolong how much water that we're adding to the base flows that are just naturally occurring. Today, we're here on the 8th, so we're actively implementing block water today, and then we should be completed around the 18th. So we're near the end now. This is just a figure showing what it really is looking like. This is a part of the request. This helps PG&E guide the releases and timing. We also always pay attention to what the moon phase is. That has a lot to do with how fish move out. So that's been pretty consistent over the years of trying to tie in these spring releases with the moon phase. It's a pretty complicated figure here, but this is just showing that over the last few years, we've learned a lot about the dynamics of the reservoir, cold water, warm water, and the mixing ratio. So PG&E has actually done an amazing job. Their operators are fantastic of really trying to pinpoint and get in that temperature range. It's really desirable. It's not an automated thing. It's very manual, so they're constantly having to tweak it. It takes a lot of time. But they've been doing a great job with that, and now we're developing these modeling tools that are aiding them do that a bit more efficiently. So this is where we are now. I don't have the complete data set, but just looking at May, here's the block water bump, and we did see an increase in the number of outmigrants for Chinook. The orange is Chinook, the blue is adult lamprey, and the yellow is juvenile steelhead. We're really targeting the juvenile Chinook. But every year that we do some variation of the strategy, the lamprey really seem to cue in on it, and we get a lot of lamprey moving into the project area. So this is the fish versus flow picture. And this is what it looks like with temperature. So same time frame, here's the start of the release, and temperatures increase, obviously, and the red is the temperatures at Cape Horn in the ladder, and the yellow is at the base of Scott Dam. So there's some variations with temperature, but you can see that PG&E has done a great job of really trying to hit that temperature target. We saw initial bump with fish. You know, other years have been a little bit more convincing with temperature when the fish are queuing out. This year it's a bit more variable. But one exciting thing about this year, and I don't know if Scott Harris is here, who actually collects this information, but getting a lot of Chinook this year. I don't know how this compares to years past, but we're well over 5,000 out migrants leaving the project area. So that's a pretty good sign. I mean, previous years it's been maybe a few hundred. I mean, there's challenges with trap efficiency and whatnot, but this is a pretty high number. So we're encouraged. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions for Josh? Any comment? Commissioner
I'm
Brown?
just wondering if Scott Harris might, if he has any comment? No. Okay.
Can you
Come
come up,
forward.
Scott? please?
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries. I will say this, our numbers that we're getting in my trap are only a very small fraction of what the fish are moving out. I just want to make that clear. We had 5,000 to date. It could be more like 100,000 going from the project because we're only sampling a very small amount of water. So.
Well, I personally want to thank you very much for pardon?
He needs to state his name for the record.
Scott
please.
Harris,
Yes.
CDFW.
Want to thank you very much for being a great host. Latest tour out there at
The lamb
that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
That was good.
Very good.
Got time for one more question.
Any comments from the public on this the spring release study? Jim, sorry.
Yeah, that's
Commissioner Steele, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you guys are doing a great job, and of course we're all trying to figure out how to get the fish in, try to get the fish out. Temperatures are a big deal. Keeping the water in the stream at the right time so that it can migrate all the way. So I'm going to jump to another question that always bothers me about trying to keep the fisheries going. That's ocean conditions. Are we releasing these fish out into an ocean that's actually going to be forgiving for a new egress of fish? I know that it is so dependent on ocean conditions. So do you know anything about that?
You caught me. I know that the ocean fishery is going to be limited this year in terms of escapement goals and whatnot to the rivers. Ocean conditions right now, I can't speak to be honest. I haven't tracked that. But to your point, it's definitely very important what's going on in the ocean, but it's obviously very important what's going on in the river. And so in a universe where the populations have declined so much, the buffer to deal with those years of bad ocean conditions are just magnified. I mean, if you look in Alaska where there are robust fisheries, there's boom and bust years, but it's relative. We're talking about hundreds and thousands, if not millions of fish. Here we're talking about hundreds of fish, maybe a few thousand. So those bad ocean years, in combination with drought sometimes, yeah, it's concerning, and obviously makes our job very difficult.
Well, it also it causes a problem when you're trying to figure out your level of success. Because if you think you're doing well and the fish don't come back, it may not have anything to do with you. We had these huge warm water areas in the ocean in the last couple of years that moved up into the Arctic area. These are very concerning, and it should concern everyone. But that has a lot to do with your measure of success. So you just keep pumping out fish, but you got to know that that's going to have an effect on us. I was just hoping we had a good year for this egress of fish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you very much, Joshua and Scott. And I get it. We kind of did a topsy-turvy here and brought Commissioner Steele back in, but no comments from the public on this? Okay. Thank you very much. We will go to our next item, which is the Potter Valley Project Fisheries Study update, and also a brief update regarding the status of license compliance studies and the relicensing. This normally comes to us from Paul Kubicek, who is the Senior Consulting Scientist for Pacific and Gas and Electric, but I believe Mr. Muller is going to make that presentation today. And I welcome you to the podium, David.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And I'm sorry my colleague Paul Kubicek was unable to attend today. So I'm going to be doing the part of the presentation that he otherwise would have made for him. using the slides that are up there. Are they also going to be up there?
Oh, yes.
Ah, perfect. So I am not Paul Kubitschek.
Don't want to cricken your neck.
I am not Paul Kubitschek, but he did work on the slides. So what I'm going to report out on, and I guess this is the projector, is there's actually two sets of aquatic studies going on right now relative to the Potter Valley project. There's the ongoing license compliance studies, which arise from the current license and the RPA and the license amendment that Josh was talking about. And then there's also the set of studies that have just begun specifically supporting the ongoing relicensing proceeding. So I'm going to talk about those two sets of studies separately. So the first studies are the license compliance studies. And this is a series of studies, as I said, required by the current FERC license and NIMP's reasonable and prudent alternative, the RPA, Josh mentioned that, to evaluate the effectiveness of the conditions in the license and the RPA. Those studies have been ongoing since 2005, and I know Paul's been here many times to report on the progress of those. And those studies will continue on at least through the termination of the current FERC license, which is April 2022. So those studies consist of the following. There's annual performance monitoring, and that's mostly about returns, returning fish at the Van Arsdale Fisheries Station. There's the Chinook salmon carcass surveys. Those are done weekly to augment the information from the Fisheries Station. There's summer water temperature monitoring, and those are at 25 sites around the project vicinity, in the project and nearby, as well as in Lake Pillsbury. And then there's the study for summer fish rearing monitoring, and that's where information is taken at 10 different sites in the vicinity of the project, and then pike minnow monitoring and suppression at 2 different sites. So those are the ongoing compliance studies, and so I'm just going to pause there for just a minute. I have to say, I'm not a fisheries biologist. I can't dig into these studies more, really. I do have a little more information if there's some questions about those, and we can get to that. So next, I'm going to move on to the relicensing studies. So these are the new studies that are being performed as part of the ongoing relicensing process that began last year. And the purpose of these studies is somewhat different than the others. So the others were to monitor the effectiveness of the current license conditions. This is a new look at the project to evaluate project impacts and to develop ultimately protection, mitigation, and enhancement measures. You'll hear them talked about as PM&Es. Most of those become conditions of the license to try and mitigate for those impacts of the ongoing operation of the project. The studies that are being performed were developed in consultation with all the stakeholders, including all the resource agencies. A study plan was developed. It was ultimately approved by FERC in February of this year with its study plan determination. And so those studies have started. It's basically a 2-year study period, 2018, 2019. The license application is due in 2020. So this is to gather the information, to supplement the existing information, and then to evaluate project impacts and develop those mitigation measures. So this is a listing of the aquatic studies related to relicensing. There's 11 studies listed here. There's a total of 21 studies in that approved study plan for the relicensing. So these are the aquatic studies, which is what I'm going to focus on today. The other studies are in a number of areas: cultural resources, tribal resources, recreation, and terrestrial studies, so terrestrial biology and so on. So, but 11 of the studies, half of them really are around aquatic. So I'll just run through this list quickly. These are all starting now. The first one, hydrology and project operations modeling, that's really to enable modeling of how the project currently operates. These are computer models. And then to test different scenarios. If you operated the project differently, what would be the implications of that in terms of flows and timing and so on. The second study up there is water temperature studies. This is a combination of both data and computer models. And you heard Josh make some reference to the ongoing work to better manage the water temperatures. This is computer modeling to be able to see if you make certain changes, how would that affect the water temperatures at various locations. So again, computer models. The next study area is water quality, and this is all the water quality parameters. And this study is conducted both in the project reservoirs and in the river reach. The next study, fluvial processes and geomorphology. This is really about the natural river processes, the movement of soil and organic material down through the river system, and it also covers spawning habitat for the various species of concern there. The next one, in-stream flow studies. This is really studying fish and amphibian habitat as a function of flow. So how does different flow regimes affect the available habitat for both fish and amphibians? The next one, Lake Pillsbury fish habitat. This is how operation of Lake Pillsbury affects fish habitat in Lake Pillsbury. The next one, about fish passage. This looks at river barriers, existing natural barriers in the river sections. It looks at passage at Cape Horn Dam. It looks at habitat, especially spawning habitat above Lake Pillsbury. And then, of course, it includes evaluation of options for achieving fish passage upstream and downstream at the Scott Dam site. The next study, fish entrainment, is really looking primarily at the effectiveness of the existing fish screen there at the intake to the power tunnel at just upstream of Cape Horn Dam, and to see if there's any modifications needed there. The next one, fish populations, looks at current fish populations, and it looks at also how those populations use the available habitat. The next one, special status in amphibians and aquatic reptiles, includes both monitoring for presence. It also looks at the available habitat and potential habitat improvements. And then the last study listed there, special status in invasive aquatic mollusks, both looks at habitat for the native mollusks and how the project affects that, and potential mitigation for project impacts, as well as looking at the ongoing prevention measures for the invasive aquatic mollusks like quagga and zebra mollusks, which there's an ongoing program to keep them out of Lake Pillsbury. So those are the studies that are in progress right now. The next slide sort of describes just a little bit about what's going on with those. The study process really involves quite a bit of different activities besides physically performing the studies. What the study plan determination did was approve a certain set of studies, and they are described in detail in the study plans. But there's additional consultation that takes place with agencies and other stakeholders on actual study implementation. Now you're actually doing it in the field, like determining study sites. I commented on a few of the studies, how many sites were involved, actually selecting the specific sites. The modeling, I mentioned the temperature modeling and the operations modeling, the computer models. Those are take quite a bit of consultation to set those up so they will accurately model the project and the actual characteristics. And then also on the survey work, again, several of the studies involved going out and taking measurements, the timing of the surveys and the protocols for those. So there's quite a bit of consultation. Then, of course, there's scheduling and conducting the actual work in the field. And then there's the heavy lifting of analyzing all the data that's gathered as a result of the studies, preparation of draft technical study reports, and then providing them back to stakeholders, including the agencies, for review and comment, and then preparation of the final technical study reports, and then annual progress reporting with all the stakeholders of how that's all going. So it's a pretty involved process doing these. And then the next steps are, following the study plan implementation phase, then PG&E prepares the final license application. So that's the application that's due by April 14th of 2020. And the FERC regulations have very specific requirements for license applications. So the study plan information is part of the input to that license application. And that license application will include the applicant's proposed conditions for the license going forward, based on, in part, on all the input from performance of all these studies. And then, as I mentioned, the final license application is due prior to April 14th, 2020. That's a statutory deadline. And if you think about it, the license doesn't expire for another 2 years after the application goes in. So everything that's going on now is preparing, gathering information and interpreting the information to prepare the application. Once the application is in, then the 5-year relicensing process provides for 2 years for the agencies of jurisdiction, state and federal agencies, to then review the application, perform their both state and federal environmental reviews, and make recommendations for the final license conditions. And that typically takes longer than 2 years, but the established process, it wouldn't take less than 2 years. So I will pause. Oh, I have one more. Yeah, questions. Good luck with that. No, I can probably answer some questions. Don't get too technical on me.
Okay, Commissioner Brown?
Thank you. And I just want to make sure, ask the clerk, we're going to have this slide posted? Okay, and it'll be on the Mendocino County Water Agency, Eel Russian River Commission. Yes, and I just want to tell everybody in the room, complete packets, if you don't have one, were just brought in by the clerk, and you can get one in the back. You talked about pike minnow suppression at 2 sites. So do you know, David, or is this a Paul Kubitschek question, where those 2 sites are?
Let me take a look at some notes that Paul provided me. I might have that. I'm not sure. So what I can provide you a little more detail. 2 raft electrofishing sites in the Eel River between Scott Dam and Cape Horn Dam.
Okay, between Scott and Cape Horn. Because this has been an important topic.
Right.
As long as I've sat on the Eel Russian River Commission, that we have those suppression sites.
Yep.
And I don't know if we've always had them through the years, but that's good news.
Commissioner Steele?
Yeah, David, I'll give you a break.
This is no match here.
I know. I'm going to give you a break. Obviously,
Yeah, thank you.
You're not Paul. But
I'll tell you though, if you do have some technical questions, I can certainly get them back to Paul.
okay. No, this is more of a context statement, and if you see a question in there, maybe you can respond to it, because basically, with all of the studies that we do inside these streams, is for a bigger context. And the context is that the stream serves a nursery for the ocean, and the ocean populations then replenish the streams and so forth. You got this bigger context. Everything we look at, of course, are in the streams, and we make a lot of assumptions of how well we're doing. And so when I look at this, I'm saying there's a couple of things I want to see that helps me understand just how well we're doing from the standpoint of the streams and the escapement to the ocean as fish condition factor prior to release to the ocean. And I don't see that study anywhere in here. And I'm concerned about that. And escapement, of course, would be how many we feel actually arrive in the ocean under good conditions for the ocean, and we don't know what the ocean conditions are. And so all of that should probably be dovetailed in with NOAA and their studies. I would like to see that bigger context. I'm just saying that from my own geeky side. But I know that I've been looking at this for a lot of years, and I've watched this factor affect the fisheries all along the coast. We see less and less water in those streams. We see worse and worse ocean conditions. And we're going to have to adjust to that, and the reality has to be what's the best way to handle fish and produce the best condition factor for the most possible success when they get to the ocean, and maybe get away from numbers a little bit and look at it from that standpoint. Just if you see a question in there, you can respond to it, but that's just my comment on what I see you folks doing.
What kind of study is that called again, Supervisor Steele? I mean, what would that, is that done in many other contexts? Have you seen those studies done that really kind of achieve that higher context as opposed to the summation of specificity, as we would call it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is done. It is done on a higher level, a higher plane, for sure, with the NOAA, but from the standpoint of the people on the ground, we used to do this in the old days all the time. I mean, every stream we looked at, what's the fish condition factor at the end of the season? We look at the stream continuum. Are we basically doing as well as we can throughout the full stream profile? We look at all the individual habitat characteristics and then focus on the life history condition of the fish at that time. Have we done the best we can for that particular life history stage? So if you're looking at spawning, you're looking at the best spawning conditions. You're looking at the growth, you're looking at the best growth conditions. You're looking at predator-prey relationship, you're looking at that. And I've been out there a lot with, checking out the bugs to make sure we had the right populations for the fish. And you can really tell a lot about how you're handling the land, how much water you're taking out at different times. Now, my purposes after I left the agency, of course, was as a consultant. So the information that I produced had a lot to do with making sure each fish had enough support within a stream, regardless of how much water came out of it, how it was taken out during the year, and what was the base flows. I don't see it done the same way. I'm sorry that it isn't, because a lot of people are involved in this that look at what they see as the key thing to study, such as fish passage. There is so much more than fish passage. And I would like to see more of a holistic context in this whole scenario, particularly from the standpoint of maybe working with NOAA and getting that kind of reflection. But yes, it is done.
Well, on that notion, I think we have people like the Eel River Recovery Project and also the state Fish and Wildlife, who have been doing some studies on different reaches of the river. So we do have some data for sure. I don't know if somewhere along the line there'll be ability to accumulate that data. I'm not sure. But I understand that you're basically doing what you're being asked by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Well, that's right. But it certainly understand that the information that's being collected through this study plan was developed through a collaborative process working with both the state and federal agencies of jurisdiction for exactly this purpose. And I know that much of the study plan information, while it might sound incremental when you're looking at it, individual studies, the temperature, the fluvial processes, habitat, it sounds all incremental. But each of those subject areas have been identified because each of them contribute in their own way to that overall sort of a more global perspective on the well-being of the fish that Commissioner Steele's talking about there. So I'm certain that this information will come together in that way. The other thing I would comment is I think you're all aware there is the Eel River Forum, a self-convened group that is made up of representatives of many river stakeholders and resource agencies that's come up with a series of recommendations for actions on the Eel River from its headwaters clear to the ocean to improve that life cycle experience for the fish. So beyond the specific study areas and focus areas and mitigation measures specifically related to the Potter Valley project, I'm aware there's a much broader look going on and many other projects, and PG&E is a participant in that Eel River Forum. So that may...
I'm giving you more of an opportunity than anything with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
statements.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Commissioner Brown?
And the Eel River Forum, those are public meetings?
As far as I know, they are. There may be someone else here who could answer that.
They are, and
Come up to the microphone, please. State your name for the record.
Joshua Fuller, National Marine Fisheries Service. Yeah, the Eel River Forum is a public forum, and many folks here and a lot of stakeholders involved, and FERC relicensing, biop implementation, all participate in that. I did want to chime in a little bit about Commissioner Steele's comment about the context of these studies. There actually is an element in the fish population study about a life cycle model, and what that actually does is we had a lot of discussion going through these FERC studies and deciding on what really needed to be done. We needed some glue to bring in the big picture, and what all these studies, these elements are really looking at are things we think are limiting factors, potentially, trying to prove whether or not they actually are or not, but we need something to bring all that together. And the latest and greatest, at least from NOAA Fisheries perspective, is a use of a life cycle model, which really brings in those limiting factors and then layers that with life stages. And so we can really start to develop these scenarios where, what do we get out of fish passage? Are there other limiting factors that are a greater concern, flows, temperatures, whatnot? So there is something in place to bring these studies together, and so we have a better idea how to operate this project, or the Eel River for that matter, overall.
And one more question, Josh, and maybe you're not the one that actually knows, but we have had presentations, I think, a year and a half ago from the Eel River Forum, and you've stated they are public meetings, but how does one get on their listing if they're interested to attend? Do you know that process?
I believe Cal Trout is the host of those meetings. I'm looking in the audience. Yeah, I'm getting a nod. So you contact them. Darren Moreau typically orchestrates those meetings. If I guess someone or an entity is really struggling, trying to figure out when those meetings occur, feel free to email me and I can assist. But it's important that the folks start plugging into these different arenas where they can get information and get involved in the dialogue. Yeah, so one last comment too that's a little bit different than the Eel River Forum, and to Commissioner Steele's point too, this glue, but we also have a component to really figure out what the population of Chinook salmon and steelhead to some extent is in the eel. I mean, one major data gap is we really don't know how many fish are escaping back into the Eel River. We have some ideas. We have like Ben Arsdale, which is way up in the watershed. There's some efforts going on in the South Fork. But part of these FERC studies, PG&E is going to be partnering with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and really testing sonar technology at specific locations in the eel where that match NOAA Fisheries population framework, which is really important for recovery. It gets a little complicated, but we're going to be testing that actually this fall. And if that proves to be relatively successful, we can start really starting to see how many fish are coming in, and then we can start looking at the recruitment of juveniles as they make their way out to the ocean. So hear you loud and clear, and we are talking about these very things and putting things in a context and in the greater Eel River picture and as they relate to the project.
Follow up.
Yep. Scott, did you have anything to add to that? Okay, it's Scott Harris. Thank you. I will open it up right now to the public if anybody has any questions or comments on that particular presentation. And Mr. Muller will be standing by because he's got some more news for us on the next item.
That's right. I can read from your notes. Thanks.
And by the way, while
notes, yeah.
we're waiting for that, I would like to note that the entire packet, including the presentations, is online.
Yep, thank you. Good morning, David Keller, Friends of the Eel River. And I appreciate the work that's being done in these studies by PG&E and the associated agencies. I do want to remind the Commission that substantially and significantly absent from the studies are dam safety, reliability, and stability studies. FERC refused to include that as part of the public process for relicensing. They insisted that they have their annual and alternate year review. Those are done by inside staff, by their own consulting teams, and occasionally by, on a periodic basis, by outside consulting engineers, and they assure us that that is sufficient. However, that is exactly what they told DWR regarding the safety and stability of Oroville. So there is no way for the public to be able to determine what is the safety and stability, particularly of Scott Dam, which has been a problematic, it's actually a textbook case of a problematic dam since it was built in 1921. There are now new studies that are coming out indicating that the earthquake impacts, the seismic impacts of two faults going through Lake Pillsbury as threads off of the Hayward Fault are much higher prospect or much higher risk of a much more significant earthquake than PG&E has used in their reports that we've been able to see. Right now, as you're well aware, virtually all of the safety information, including inundation, all the way down to the mouth, which could be a 30-foot wall of water over 8 hours down to the mouth, that is all CEII. It's private. It's confidential. Without the release of significant information on dam safety and stability, without the ability to look at the data gaps and to be able to have independent public peer review on the dam stability and safety, everything that we're talking about in terms of fish passage, in terms of water transfers, in terms of the reliability of the project is in significant doubt. And I would urge whatever capabilities and leverage that you have as a commission to have significant amounts of that CEII data released for public peer review would be very, very helpful. And I would appreciate if you could actually ask and push forward on that. I did have a conversation with Grant Davis as head of DWR when he was trying to get CEII information on Oroville. He was turned down. This is a very serious problem, and without having that in hand, we have a 100-year-old project with safety questions that remain unanswered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. Welcome.
I'm Ellen Faulkner. I'm from Redwood Valley, and I've been interested in this Potter Valley project for 30 years at least, because it's only 4 miles from my house, the Van Arsdale Reservoir. And I live on the, actually I live on the saddle between the Eel River, the East Fork of the Russian River, and the main stem of the Russian River. And they all come off of this area where I live. So it's been interesting for me all these years. And my understanding is approximately what the gentleman from the Friends of the Eel River said about dam safety. I was up there one time and I saw that the experts that were there concerned with dam safety said, well, there's an innie where there should be an outie. I mean, it's a design flaw in the dam, which everybody can see. And I didn't know about the earthquakes. Anyway, the other two things I wanted to talk about is this Potter Valley project the PG&E wants to unload it. Okay, I can understand. It's a kind of a bad investment for them because the dam will sooner or later have to be come down, and it won't be much of a loss as far as water storage goes, because for 100 years, sediment has been piling up behind that dam and made the water storage capacity negligible practically. So it's not holding water. It's not doing anything at all, but being a serious issue for safety. And the other issue for safety is that whenever you have a reservoir on a river, blue-green algae comes into it, especially in Lake Pillsbury because it's so shallow. And blue-green algae is the very thing that changes mercury, which is pouring into Lake Mendocino because of the old gold mines. They are pouring into that reservoir, and blue-green algae and the mercury get together, and it becomes organic. That fish can eat that algae, and they eat the mercury. That mercury goes out to the ocean and the outflow of our rivers, and makes the fish in the ocean full of mercury. And that's something that the Eel Russian River Commission should be dealing with, is the mercury content of the fish in the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further thoughts or comments from the commissioners?
Well,
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I just want to thank PG&E for these ongoing studies. I think it'll bring us a lot of good information, and appreciate it, even though you have recently made your announcement about your intentions of the FERC relicensing. But the ongoing studies are very important.
I would like to throw out a question to my fellow commissioners, and see, did that issue of releasing information about the dam safety resonate with any of you, if you have any thoughts on that?
What do you mean resonate? That we should ask for that information to be released? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that was.
As far as I'm concerned, after Orville, it all ought to be released. I mean, we need to get this out there for everybody to have a look at it. The agency should be called into question so they can defend this information they have. I've always been for that. And having worked for an agency for 30 years, I've always been for it. And very clear, clarion call was from DWR and their unwillingness to actually look at their data in a different way, and it turned out a friend of mine who went over to work for them said that he was actually going to be releasing his information because he worked for him. The call from the agency was that if anybody asks you, the dam spillway is built on bedrock. He says, thank God I never got that question, and I retired before it came up because it didn't turn out to be that way. And the information that they looked at afterwards was always there for them to discover. So I do resonate with what the gentleman said. And if there's this commission can call for that, I would agree with it.
Commissioner Gore?
Agreed.
Commissioner Brown?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
Can I get another shot in?
pardon?
Can I get another comment? You asked for discussion.
Yes,
right?
Commissioner.
Yeah, I would like to have a little bit
Steele,
more.
as much as you want.
As much as I want. Just one comment. I was going to throw out another question to David, but I'll just throw it out there as another statement for you guys to listen for. One of the reasons that I'm going in this direction from the standpoint of the ocean is that your work with the fisheries in the Eel River may have a very high importance if you look at it from the standpoint of the weak stock burden. And we don't know what the weak stock burden is on the eel. It would be great if we did have that information from NOAA. And I do know they're doing a lot of weak stock, strong stock studies in the ocean. And if they could do the genetics to find out if the burden is high in the eel, then it has even more importance to look at the condition factor of those fish that escape if, in fact, they are the weak stock. And I think that they are. So that's just something I'll throw out there that gives you even higher importance. And everything that we do in the eel from the standpoint of fisheries is important, but this may even be more so. So I would just want to get that one in. Thank you.
Mr. Mueller, if you wouldn't mind, I have a quick question for you regarding this this request for this information. Can you give us an idea of what the situation is in terms of is this information not available, and can you address at all why it wouldn't be?
Sure. So it's a little vague to say this information.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
there's lots of information. That's like saying, can you provide this information on the fisheries? So it needs to be more specific. So what I would recommend the commission do is identify specific information it would like to receive, and submit that to PG&E, and we actually have an internal policy for responding to those. There's quite a bit of information available to the public directly from the section at FERC that deals with dam safety, as well as from Department of Water Resources Division of Safety of Dams. That I don't know if people are actually going to those sources and assessing what information is available to the public and requesting it from there. But if a request comes to PG&E, part of our response will be identifying what information is already available to the public from those sources. And like I say, there's actually quite a bit of information. And there may be additional information that PG&E is able to release, and there's undoubtedly going to be some information that won't be made public. So, make a request and we'll take a look at it.
That sounds good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Let me think about this. Any suggestions on how we do this? Then we send a letter to PG&E requesting the information and get back a response that tells us what's available, and drill down into that. So I would entertain a motion along those lines.
I move to have your staff put together a request. Joking. If you need any help, potentially what we can do, as I say that jokingly, because what we always do is it's like so moved, but who's really putting this together? I don't want to put any undue burden, right. But maybe what we can do is with respect to the dam safety and the other stuff, I would actually request maybe that through a motion that the chair work with Commissioner Steele, because you have a lot of experience in this, just to see what is the information that would be most valuable for both fisheries and dam safety, and put together a letter. So that's my motion. I don't know if you're open to it, but you know it better than me, so it'd be nice to have you review a letter.
Yeah, I am. Actually, I have quite a bit of information in this area.
We need a second to discuss.
And before we second, I want to make sure we're agreement on the first. I do have a little bit of information on this, and some of the issues that I have are the lateral movement in that area, and whether or not we do have good numbers on it, because that's what's really going to take that dam down. Otherwise, the shaking, the rest of it, I'm not so concerned about it. Great. We do have earthquakes in Lake County. We have floods. We have fire. We have volcanoes. We've got it all, and we're pretty experienced. So, and
we're in God's country.
And I've been getting more experience lately. Believe me, this has been an interesting term. So I was able to make available some stuff to myself with regard to this particular dam. So I'll look it up. I'll come up with some suggestions and bring it back to the commission for a letter.
Well, I think the motion was for you and me to work together and put a letter together.
Yeah,
so
I'll second that.
You will second that? Okay, great. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
The only thing I'd add to the motion is that feel free to go ahead and send out whatever is needed after you guys do it. You don't have to come back to the rest of us to ask for a formal meeting to delay the process. Yes. I would give you the credence to be able to have our support to send that request out.
Thank you.
Second agrees.
Okay, great. Okay, any discussion from the public on that motion? Carter?
Good morning. Vivian Hellewell, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. I have some comment and information on weak stock burden from the Eel River stocks in the ocean fishery, or the commercial fishery.
Excuse me, but we're talking about the request for information about the dam safety.
I'll pick that up later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, back to the commission. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. So Commissioner Steele and myself will be getting a letter to PG&E as soon as we can figure out what that letter will say. Thank you very much for a good and robust discussion, and that brings us on to another presentation from Mr. Muller, and this is a letter from, accompanied by a letter from PG&E dated May 10th.
All right. Thank you again for the opportunity to come to speak to the Commission to follow up my May 10th letter. That letter, of course, was following up the presentation I made to the Commission on February 23rd. And in that presentation, I informed the Commission that PG&E was evaluating its options for the future of the Potter Valley project, and I named several options that we were taking a look at and advised the Commission that I expected there to be some sort of decision made among those options within the next couple of months. And so the May 10th letter I sent was to follow that up and advise the Commission that, in fact, PG&E had reached a conclusion among the options it was evaluating. So just to touch, I know you've taken a look at that letter, but just to touch on the key points, since perhaps not everybody here has taken a look at that. But what I hope to do today is I'm going to touch on several topics. So I'm going to tell you what they are so you know where I'm headed with this. I'm just going to briefly summarize what was in the letter, how PG&E came to its decision to auction the project. I'll touch on the relationship between that decision and the relicensing. I'm going to talk just briefly about the auction process that we anticipate. I'll name a few other projects PG&E has in auctioning. I'll talk about the FERC and the CPUC approval process and the current status of our preparation for the auction. And I think all that, although it sounds like a lot of stuff, should only take about 10 minutes or so. So if that would work for the Commission, I'll go through that and I'd be happy to answer questions.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
All right. And I have to say, I'm picking those subjects because we've gotten a lot of questions, and those seem to be the key subject areas of those questions. So just summarizing the letter real briefly, the decision is really driven by PG&E's determination that it's not in the long-term best interest of PG&E's electric customers to continue to own and operate the project. The decision definitely recognizes that the project has other benefits, environmental, recreation, and water supply are sort of the big buckets out there. And as I noted in the letter, while we're preparing to start the auction this fall, we're open to exploring with government entities the prospect of possibly transferring the project to a regional entity as a local or regional entity as an alternative to the auction. If there is such discussion, we would assess progress on that and then decide whether to actually initiate the auction in the fall. Meanwhile, we'll be preparing for that. The auction will be open up to any qualified entity. We're anticipating interest in participation in the auction by power generators or power suppliers, water supply interests, conservation groups, tribes, and possibly any combination of those four groups. From what we've seen on others and what we know about this project. The transfer in my letter noted that it will require both FERC and CPUC approval, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We expect the entire process from beginning to end, once we start the auction, would take 1.5 to 2 years to actually complete and transfer the project. As far as the relicensing generally, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, we plan to continue the relicensing proceeding, and that application that's due by April 14th, 2020 is due by that date regardless of the auction, regardless of who would be the project owner. It's a statutory deadline. And we anticipate that a new owner relative to the project would simply step into PG&E's shoes relative to the relicensing. So whatever state that is in at the time of project transfer, they'd simply step into PG&E's shoes. So those are sort of the key points of the letter, just to sort of reiterate those. Now, how we came to the decision, as I talked about at February, we evaluated 5 options. We looked at sale through either an auction process or a bilateral negotiation. We looked at withdrawing the notice of intent to relicense, which would orphan the project, and that goes down a whole process at FERC. We looked at decommissioning the project, and we also looked at continuing to own and operate the project. The decision is really driven by a number of factors, but the three big ones are, frankly, PG&E's need for electric generation is in decline. Our load is decreasing due to the advent of community choice aggregation entities and rooftop solar. We don't need as much power to deliver our customers. That load is going down. The project itself generates a lot less power than it used to. Coming out of the license amendment 2004, the reasonable and prudent alternatives cut generation by about 50%. And also, and this is a big factor, is the remoteness of the project from all of PG&E's other hydropower facilities, which are all located in the Sierra and the Southern Cascade. And so it's problematic to operate this distant project. The decision has been complicated. It took us quite a while to reach this, but in particular, it's complicated by the ongoing relicensing decision, and also consideration of the non-power benefits of the project and how that plays out and how it affects the communities and all these concerns and how can all that get resolved. It's been a very complicated process. We don't look at it just from a power generation perspective. The auction was selected among those options because we think it makes the most sense, because it provides the opportunity for all entities to basically pursue their interests. We certainly are aware different entities have different interests in the projects for different purposes. PG&E's purposes for power generation. An auction allows everybody to participate and pursue their interests. As I noted in the letter, PG&E is open to exploring transfer of the project to a regional entity while we prepare for the auction. And this is really to provide a reasonable opportunity to put this regional asset into regional control. I think you all know the project very well. PG&E is continually in the middle, being pulled from both sides. And no matter what we do, most people are unhappy. So the idea here is to provide an opportunity to put this regional asset into regional control. And so that's why we want to create this opportunity for dialogue as we prepare for the auction. Based on recent experience with other projects, we fully expect to be able to sell the project through an auction. And I'm going to mention a couple of those other ongoing proceedings. As far as impacts of the auction on the relicensing, we think there'll be minimal impact. The relicensing is driven by federal statute and FERC's regulations. That, as I've mentioned several times now, the application is still due by April 2020. PG&E continues to be the licensee, owner, and operator of the project until such time as a sale would close. And when you consider our estimate of 1.5 to 2 years to conduct that auction process once we start, and you think about that deadline for filing the application, it's very likely PG&E is still going to be the licensee when that date rolls around. The other thing about relicensing is all the drivers for relicensing, all the issues that I've talked about and Josh talked about, and you saw the study, those issues are the same issues. It doesn't matter whether it's PG&E or another licensee. The project's impacts on affected resources are the same. The data needed to be collected is the same. The statutes that require mitigation of those impacts are the same. So we really don't see it changing things much there. And the last thing on the relicensing, it's not all that unusual to transfer a project while it's in a hydro project while it's in relicensing. As I said, it's a statutory 5-year minimum duration process. It often goes substantially longer than that. Probably 7 to 10 years is more typical. We've had them go more than 20. So things change in those kind of time frames. So it's not that unusual. And in fact, a project that PG&E sold and transferred last year, completed the sale to Merced Irrigation District, it's in relicensing too. So it's still in relicensing. So that's not that unusual of a circumstance. As far as the auction process itself, we have another project that's in an auction process right now. I'll touch on that in a minute. But we expect to use a similar process here as to what we're using right now on PG&E's 26 megawatt DeSable Centerville project located up on Butte Creek. And that process is called a request for offers process, or RFO process, you'll hear. So this isn't a bunch of people in a room with paddles, holding up their, it's not that. What the request for offer process is, it really considers a number of factors other than price, and it's intended to support the needs of both the buyer and the seller. I'll say it's a business process. It's not a regulatory process, so the participants in the process will be the potential buyers. So the steps in this process, the first step would be distribution of marketing materials and a non-disclosure agreement to any interested party. That'll be totally open to anyone. And we will also advertise the project. I can tell you we've already gotten a number of inquiries since our announcement from entities who are interested in the project. So the first step would be this distribution of marketing materials and a non-disclosure agreement. Parties that sign the non-disclosure agreement then get access to more comprehensive information about the project. And this would be via what we call a virtual data room. It's a data room, but instead of being a physical room, it's an electronic room. So that's how we do that. The participants would then review that material and submit what's called an indicative proposal. And that's where they indicate their qualifications and their proposed terms to acquire the project. So see, it's very different than the paddles in the room. This is the participants propose their terms and their qualifications for the project. PG&E then evaluates those indicative proposals, identifies the most qualified participants, and those that are selected get additional information through the VDR. They have the opportunity to inspect the facilities. They get access to PG&E's subject matter experts on the project. And that leads to those participants submitting what's called a letter of intent and their proposed terms and conditions. So this is different than the indicative proposal. This is generally what they have in mind. Now they're getting down specific terms and conditions. And the letter of intent says, we would go through with this purchase in the event our terms and conditions are accepted. So again, PG&E would then evaluate those, and among those parties would select one or perhaps more counterparties, and then negotiate a formal purchase and sale agreement based on those terms and conditions. So back to that time frame, from that first step of issuance of the marketing materials, we think it takes about 6 months to identify who that counterparty is that we're then engaging in the more detailed negotiations. At probably 6 months to a year to conduct those detailed negotiations and actually prepare and execute a purchase and sale agreement, and then another 6 to 12 months to get the regulatory approvals. There's 2 of those. California Public Utilities Commission has to approve sale of a utility asset, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission would need to approve the transfer of the license. So the 2 regulatory approvals, those happen simultaneously. FERC approval is 3 to 6 months. CPUC approval is probably more like 6 to 12 months. So when you stack that all together, that's how you get the 1.5 to 2 years. You know, there's each of those steps has some variability, but that's how you come up with that. We haven't determined minimum qualifications, but typically it's going to be around experience, financial capability, and ability to execute on the proposal. We intend to go through with the sale. We need to make sure the counterparty can actually execute on the proposal. As I said, public participation in this is limited to those 2 regulatory processes, the FERC process of approving license transfer and CPUC process of approving sale of the utility asset. But the actual RFO process itself is the parties who are actually potential buyers. I said that this process is the process PG&E is using right now. We have an ongoing auction of a 26 megawatt hydro project, DeSalvo Centerville project up on Butte Creek. That process is well along. It's in the selection of the counterparty phase right now. There's quite a bit of activity and interest in that project. PG&E also announced just last month that it plans to auction 2 more hydro projects, Kern project on the Kern River, and that's the 11.5 megawatts, Tule project on the Tule River. Both of those auction processes will start in late June. We expect to use the RFO process on those as well. It's publicly announced that PG&E is in negotiations with Yuba County Water Agency for sale of the 12 megawatt Narrows project up on the Yuba River. It's just downstream of YCWA's hydro project. I can tell you we are in confidential negotiations with some other parties on a few other projects. And as I mentioned, we completed the sale through a bilateral negotiation of a 3.5 megawatt Merced Falls last year to Merced Irrigation District. We also have, just for interest, we also have one project, Killark Cow Creek, that's in the decommissioning process, and we're just there getting final approval for the details of the decommissioning. So I'm mentioning that just to help you understand this is not like a one-off situation. There are a number of projects that are facing similar circumstances, not exactly the same as Potter Valley, but the same things of diminishing load. In many cases, the remote operation applied to several of these others as well. And yeah. Just to wrap up here, FERC license transfer process, that application is a joint application between, it would be PG&E as the current licensee and the proposed transferee. It's a joint application. The main qualification FERC looks for in the proposed transferee is their ability to comply with the license conditions. Do they have the capability to do that? A lot of that has to do with financial capability. They want to make sure that the resources available to the proposed transferee, that they could comply with the license conditions. And as I said, that process takes 3 to 6 months. In the case of Merced Falls, it took 4 months, just to give it some reality there. And then the CPUC approval process, primarily what the CPUC is looking for is, does the transaction make sense from the perspective of PG&E's electric customers? And as you heard, that's a key driver for this whole thing. So, they approved the sale on Merced Falls without complexity. So we would expect that to be approved. The last item I was going to touch on is the current status of the auction, since our letter went out a month ago, a little less than a month ago. As I think all of you know, there's been quite a bit of coverage of that decision in local and some regional media, a lot of interest in it. It's also been picked up in a number of trade publications that serve the electric power industry, so information's out there. As I mentioned earlier, interested parties have begun to contact PG&E to find out more about it. How can they make sure that they're on the list, that they get the marketing information, and is there any further information we can provide now? We're well along in development of the virtual data room. I would say it's probably 80% done, gathering all the relevant project information in there. And we're working on the marketing materials that would go out with that first package. And my May 10th letter talked about the fall. Narrowing it down a little, it's probably more in the August, September timeframe. We would think we would be ready to initiate that process. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to try and answer questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of them, but I'll give it a go.
I don't know, but I think there might be a few. So if you would, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What if there isn't a bidder?
If there what?
What if PG&E has no bidders?
Oh, so like if the auction is unsuccessful? Well, we'd have to assess the situation at that time. Even going through a process that ultimately doesn't result in the auction will provide a bunch of information that would be useful in deciding next steps. But I do have to say we've gotten some pretty serious interest to date, so I would expect to at least have participants in the auction. And based on our experience with DeSalle Centerville, there's quite a bit of interest there, and we expect that sale to go through. So it's a good question to ask, but we're pretty optimistic that it would transfer through this process.
Commissioner Gore?
Yeah, thank you very much. So even though we say auction, it really means that in August or September, the RFOs are all going to be bundled, right? So if I mean, you say you have interest from others, do you wait and bundle all of those RFOs together and then initiate your process afterwards? Or if you get one that you think is a high likelihood, do you already start to initiate the process beforehand? Is it like an end date and then you collate and go forward?
No, all that marketing information would go out at one time. So all we're doing right now is if people contact PG&E and say, hey, I hear, Potter Valley project, you're planning to auction it, we'd like to be included in that process. We take their name and their contact information, we'll include them on the list. So at that time, when we're ready to actually initiate the auction, then any entity or party that's on that list would then receive that information, and they could make whatever decisions they wanted to at that time.
And
so there's really not, the kind of information that I'm presenting here in a public forum today. We're fine with that, but real detailed information about it probably isn't going to come out until the marketing step.
When do you anticipate the marketing stuff coming out? Is there an opening date also? So you've sent a letter, right, saying we're going to go ahead and do this. Is that August, September timeline when you want all submissions to come in? Is that the end date, or is that when you're going to release all these marketing materials and start this conversation?
Yeah, it's really the second one, Commissioner Gore. So we're gathering names of parties who have expressed an interest. We're preparing the information that we'll use to support the auction process. But when we issue that marketing information, and incidentally, all that information will be publicly available information because it's going out to anyone who wants it. But it'll basically say, it'll say PG&E owns this asset. Here's a general description of the asset. We intend to conduct a request for offer type process to transfer ownership of it, and it would have information about it when those indicative proposals would be due.
Okay.
And when, and when the non-disclosure agreement, and there would be enough time in there, probably, a month or two, so that to give parties the time to, look at that information, talk internally. Do they want to do the next step? Okay. And that whole process between the issuance of the marketing information and actually selecting a counterparty, like I said, it's about we from experience on DeSalvo Centerville, and we're also have a investment banker outside of PG&E that we use on these transactions, and so we also have tapped into experience much broader than just PG&E's experience with this in 6 months or so to be able to identify that counterparty and start the detailed negotiations is about normal.
It's interesting to hear how this, because a lot of us think about it in terms of government, like you issue an RFP, right?
Right.
And you have to have all of your information in, and you have to have everything in. But it's helpful to kind of hear you say what you're talking about, because it's almost like these marketing materials are released, and then you have almost an intention come in, not a notice of intent, but this request for offer to come in from maybe a party or multiple parties, and they come in and say, we're interested, here's our resources, here's our intention, here's our direction, and then you go into like 6 months of data exchange and discussions and other things like that to decide who at the end of it you want to select. So it's almost like a request for partnership dialogue, right? I mean,
yeah, I probably wouldn't use the term partnership since that's a legal term, but it is a process that is intended to meet the needs of both the buyer and the seller. And because there's very diverse kinds of potential buyers here, their interest in the project may be quite diverse. Presumably, if it's an electric power interest, their interest is continuing to operate the project for electric power. If it's another entity, their interests may be very different, so their proposal might be very different. So what we're trying to do here is create a process that it doesn't just exclude or doesn't just focus on continued operation of the project for power generation, but opens up the door for any interested party who has an interest in the future of the project to step forward and offer up their proposal. This is who we are. Here's our qualifications to participate. Here's what we think we would do going forward.
Good.
And that just seems like, given the diversity of interests, that seems like a good way to go here.
I think one of the things that I'd like to kind of request from the commission is, whether now or later, is or at a future date, is a discussion of the legality of our council's kind of oversight of this. Because, I mean, here's the first thing. The reason I say this is because I've already received a litany of what I would call frivolous and petty accusations. And I say that very directly to a couple people who haven't even contacted me, and with lists and other things set, and people who I thought I know, but you know, they come in and say like that people are commiserating here and do anything. The real thing I would say is that by you referencing this and us not having anything, we don't know what we're going to do with this. I don't know what we're going to do with this, right? I don't think anybody on this board knows what we're going to do with this. I've been very careful. I live under the Brown Act every day, but I'd like some guidance from us for whether it's staff members or others, now that it's like the starting gun has really been kind of thrown, or shot, is how do we really do this appropriately? Because to me, this is a public forum where we try and do this. It's funny to be accused of a Brown Act violation by the same group that doesn't want us to even have a JPA. So if there wasn't a JPA, there wouldn't be any Brown Act requirements in and of itself. But I'm just kind of saying this because I don't really know what we're going to do. And I'm saying that publicly. I don't know if we're going to come in. I mean, people have all these different machinations. Oh, the water agency wants to do this. No, actually, we don't know what we're going to do. But by you putting forth a process, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. And if it's going to be people as regions coming together as others. But I want to make sure going forward, despite other frivolous accusations going back, I want to make sure I'm clean going forward. So that if I need to, as a commissioner, not be involved directly in anything, I need, you know what I mean? I need to figure out what that is. And if you need help from our councils or others, please, ask for that as the commission, because I know Humboldt, I mean, it depends on how much resources you have and others. But we're going to have to make some legal determinations how we as commissioners either participate, or if we just take a back seat and talk about this here, and then have our staff members and other things figure things out. But, I want to be appropriate.
I really appreciate that, Commissioner Gore. I think that the important thing is that you're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. We do have a discussion of the JPA after this, and of your and my work on the ad hoc committee. I think there's a lot that has to be figured out in a very, very complex process, but I truly appreciate you standing up for this commission. I think we're doing a great job of actually empowering the public to understand what's going on, and to be very open as we move forward. Commissioner Brown.
Well, I was going to piggyback, but I can wait till we go forward. But to address your comments as well, I think each one of us individually felt it had to be a more regional discussion, and it had to be in a public forum. And so this commission historically has followed. That's how it was formed. It was the last relicensing. And I'm glad we got the JPA out so we can look at it, because we've never had this conversation about the original JPA. And that way everybody on the commission, each one of us, staff of all the respective counties, as well as the public, understand what's there and what our mission is.
This whole situation is extremely complex, and what I want to see as our guiding light as we move forward on all sides is that we work together to resolve a regional issue. And I want to know if Commissioner Steele had anything, because I do have a question for Mr. Mueller.
I do. General question. In your auction process, will that be open to domestic only, or will it be international?
I don't think we've given any consideration to that at this point. So
but you're not limited at this point?
At this point, it's not.
Yeah, okay, because I'm getting a lot of international interest in some projects we have. And so that always concerns me because they have a different standard, a different approach, and you have different outcomes. And then the other thing is it limited to the project as a whole, in total, or piecemeal?
Well, I guess we'd see that in the indicative proposals that come in.
Okay.
But the intent is, from a PG&E's perspective, is to divest the entire Potter Valley project.
Okay.
It's not a good fit for PG&E's power generation portfolio, and so it's our intent to move it out of the portfolio.
Right,
I will say, though, that it does seem certainly possible that among those four types of interests that may want to participate, it's certainly conceivable that some of those might join forces and have different interests in the project.
You anticipated my question about partnerships, so you would be open.
Yeah. So among participants in the auction itself, the potential buyers, they can form themselves any way they want. That wouldn't be any requirement. One other, if I could just add one thing in here, I want to get back to something that Commissioner Gore said, and I want to emphasize that the reason PG&E came to this particular entity back there on February 23rd to inform this commission of this evaluation that PG&E was doing was because it seems to us that this is a regional issue. It's a regional asset, and that these four counties are the four primary governmental entities that sort of form the core group of who's affected by the project and who has an interest. And this is the one forum that we're aware of where the four counties come together, where we could have this dialogue with representatives of each of the counties sitting there. So I just want to kind of touch on that, why it's this commission that we're providing this information to.
And I want to say that I really appreciate your willingness, Mr. Mueller, to really be here with us to discuss this, to help us understand as public agencies, public personas whose every move is subject to scrutiny, I suppose, yes. So I have a couple of questions before we go to the public, and one of those, and I don't know if you're in a position to answer the first one, and I understand if you're not. Are any of the proposals that you've heard so far of a non-power character? In other words, just a water management character?
So we don't have any proposals.
Oh, okay. You just had interest.
Some entities have contacted PG&E and just said, we hear you're planning to auction this. We'd be interested in getting more information and potentially participating, but nobody's, at this point it's premature to say, and our idea is this. I mean, there will come that step in the indicative proposals, but I don't have any information on that.
And if there were to be a non-power generating proposal, how would that work with the FERC relicensing project?
It's a good question. I don't know that a non-power proposal would be excluded. FERC's statutory authority is administration of hydropower licenses, and so that's what they do, right? But there are processes to change the purpose of a project from a power project to a non-power project. And I think if that was the basis of an application ultimately submitted by PG&E, a joint application, and the proposed transferee, FERC would look at that. I mean, they do have, it's called a non-power license. Okay. And just in simple version, it's a transition process to transfer or to transition existing hydropower facilities to a non-power use. And it goes through the same kind of process as a relicensing. It's not it's a full-on public, all stakeholders, all agencies, jurisdictional authorities, the whole thing. And it would address exactly the same issues, resource issues, as a relicensing. What would come out in the end would be a non-power license that would have conditions that the licensee would have to meet before the transition of the purpose to the non-power purpose. So it's not a free ride. It looks very much like relicensing. It's just that in the end, there's no power generation.
And then finally, I just want to go into the third paragraph of your letter. You say, with this in mind, as we prepare for the auction, we're open to exploring with local, county, and or state governmental entities that have an interest in the continued operation of the project the possibility of transferring it as an alternative to auction.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that would have to happen between now and August?
What we'd be looking for, I mean, we certainly realize that the completion, I mean, the process of actually doing a transfer to get to the final step of actually transferring the project through a bilateral negotiation like that would look very much like doing it through an auction. I mean, it would probably the whole process, except for the period to select the counterparty would already be there. But the rest of it, it would be very similar. So you'd be looking at a year to a year and a half, something you'd be expecting at least to consummate that. But we feel that, you know, between the time of our announcement last month and the start of an auction in fall, that's sufficient time if there is one or more government entities that wants to approach PG&E and say, we'd really like to make this work as some sort of a transfer. We do feel it's enough time for a strong expression to that end. That would be, we'd be looking for something that's reliable. You know, can we count on this? And a real strong indication of commitment to go down that path, because clearly if that led to deferring the auction, that's a pretty serious step to defer the auction. So I don't have a list right now. It would have to have this, this, and this. But we do think that's enough time if a government entity wants to come forward to do that, and we'd be looking for a pretty strong commitment to engage in that other process.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the Commission? Okay. Oh, yes.
I just want to say thank you, because the follow-up is very instructive to me about what you're actually requesting. Like I say, is that, you know, when we hear auction or whatever, I think about it in the sense of a deadline for submission of full-blown proposals and all these others, and the information about what is this, how you've done it in other places is, I think, instructive as well. So I'm just kind of making sure I have the right list that I went over. You talked about DeSalva, Centerville. Mm-hmm. You talked about which is at what stage in the process? Just let me ask you.
It's right at the stage of selecting the counterparty to then engage in the detailed negotiations of a purchase and sale agreement.
Kern and Thule?
They will just start toward the end of this month. So that marketing step of sending out, you know, to any interested party, the publicly available information, description of the project, a non-disclosure agreement if participants want to move through to the next step. That's scheduled to come out later this month. Yeah.
So they'll be a couple months ahead of where we're at.
Oh yeah, yeah,
right. That's the track.
Yeah, they would be.
And then you talked about Merced and Yuba. Can you tell me the processes of those two?
Merced. So that was PG&E's Merced Falls project, 3.5 megawatt hydro project on the Merced River, and that was a bilateral negotiation. And it was the actual transfer of the project was completed, I think it was February of last year, February 2017. So that's a done deal. We got the FERC approval, got the CPUC approval, and that project's transferred. It's now owned by a Merced Irrigation District, and they are the FERC licensee for that project.
And Yuba?
Oh, Yuba, so that has to do with, the name of the project is the Narrows Project. It's about a 12 megawatt project. It's on the Yuba River. It's just downstream of Yuba County Water Agency's hydro project called Yuba River Development. Again, it's one of these, has some of the same attributes in the decision for Potter Valley. We approached Yuba County Water Agency and said, we have an interest in divesting this asset. Do you have an interest in acquiring it? They said yes. They decided to make their interest in the project known publicly. So there was a joint announcement that we were engaged in negotiations. There is not an executed purchase and sale agreement yet, but there's an ongoing negotiation.
That's fair. Thank you. That's very helpful. I just reiterate that I have no flippin' clue what's going to happen from here forward. So I look forward to jumping into the abyss with you all and finding the appropriate way to make the public discussions that we need to and use this place to do it. And on the other side is figuring out where whoever is going to be making applications and other things, how to appropriately section that into a place where, you know, what we can bring here. I mean, I personally, at this point, I mean, with the capacity or lack thereof of this, we can get into this, of this JPA, but I just don't see us making a bid as a JPA. I see us more as like reviewing kind of things that are going on and seeing where things are, but I could be proven wrong if when we get to that discussion. But I mean, just the, you know, this JPA, as we've said, there's just a, there's no capacity there instructive to do it. So I think the question would be does this JPA get involved in any kind of project partnerships with folks? Because how can you even do that if you have to get into a non-disclosure agreement and then you're still required to have public meetings, or you need to, and the actual intention is to continue to have public meetings, right? So having said that, we'll see where we go.
You mentioned non-disclosure agreement. I want to, if I may, just clarify, since I made reference to that in the RFO process. So that's a non-disclosure agreement about disclosing the non-public information that would be provided to participants in the auction. Okay. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to be clear that
that's a good point.
That's
it's
about
not like you can't have public meetings on the what you're doing, but you can't disclose the information that you guys get to us.
At in those steps. Okay. Once the process would get down to attempting to negotiate a detailed purchase and sale agreement, I'm not so sure that could be easily conducted in the public forum. So you asked about Yuba County Water Agency. What's publicly announced there is that PG&E and Yuba County Water Agency are engaged in a negotiation with the goal of transferring that project from PG&E to YCWA. The details of that is not being made public until a decision would be made. I mean, obviously, as a public entity, to make a final decision to proceed with an acquisition, that would all be done in a public forum.
So you say August, go ahead, August or September, right? I think that that might instruct our next meeting more than our normal quarterly timeline, because so is there any idea, like, I mean, it would be great to get a letter from you once you know what your specific timeline is, kind of your, not request for proposals, but request for offers. And then, I mean, I think it'd be appropriate for us to meet before that time to decide if there is the interest from this entity to have a discussion with PG&E. I mean, I don't know. Once again,
I think that
let's see.
I have a few thoughts on how we might move forward, but I think it's part of the discussion of the JPA. One thing I'd like to offer, just so people so the public is not quote unquote turned off by the prospect of non-disclosure. This happens quite frequently with regard to public acquisition of property or other items that have to be disclosed with lawyers, that have to be discussed with lawyers in closed room. It's called a closed door session. It's part of the Brown Act where
Allowable.
if you go into a closed-door session as a public entity, you say that you're going in to discuss this item, you report out if you've made a discussion or not. As I would think that somewhere along the line, if an entity such as this or another, were to engage in these kind of discussions, I can imagine, I don't know all of the issues that are non-disclosable, but I know post 9/11, there are certain items of regard to safety that cannot be discussed in public, whether it has to do with dams or electrical operation or data streams and all of those kinds of things. So there are definitely aspects that I can imagine just cannot be a part of the public discussion. But again, I do think that there is a process in place in the Brown Act for public agencies to have these kind of discussions. It must be noticed, and then actions must come out. If actions are taken, the actions would only be we will now discuss in public where we've gotten with this, and all decisions are made in the public. So just for that. I'm going to open it up to the public now. Are there any questions or comments on this part of the presentation?
Hi, I'm John Laboito, farmer for 35 years in Humboldt County and now also in Lake County. It seems to me that whoever becomes the owner of this project, unless they have particularly deep pockets, there's facilities to be maintained or removed and managed. And I was wondering whether Mr. Mulder could address the profitability of the hydropower operation as it exists with the current constraints, or even say if you could double the electrical generation, how would that affect the profitability?
I'm Ellen Faulkner, Redwood Valley. I still have some issues about the non-disclosure agreement that you as a group would have to make with PG&E, particularly about dam safety, since that's one of the things that maybe couldn't be involved in the decision that the public wouldn't be able to know about. So how, even if some of this information, the first marketing information is available, the second part of it wouldn't be, along with some other things that the public absolutely has to know in order to be an informed public and to help out in this situation. And I still have that concern, and it's to me, it seems like a serious concern if a public group like yourselves enters into a non-compliance agreement. I can't see that as something that should happen at all. The public should know everything it needs to know to protect itself.
Thank you.
Stephanie Tidwell, Executive Director of Friends of the Eel River. I had a more prepared statement made, but when my organization gets hostilely called frivolous from the dais, I feel obligated to respond with some of the facts as we see them. When we hear PG&E saying we're interested in transferring the Potter Valley project to a regional entity, and we see the Eel Russian River Commission saying we're interested in strengthening ourselves as a regional entity, it's pretty easy to draw the dots and think that there's something going on behind the scenes that we aren't privy to. And that may not be the case. But the fact of the matter is, these are not frivolous concerns. And yes, we want our river back, and we want to know what's going on. And what I'm hearing here today suggests that you've heard that you're consulting with council, that you are more open to more open deliberation on this, that perhaps our fears were unfounded. But I would encourage you to go a step further and to recommit to a more open and public process, because these are not unfounded fears. We want our river back. And we are concerned that there are multiple entities who may or may not have the best interests of the Eel River in mind that are looking to acquire these dams. And so, you know, as I looked through the agenda that, you know, we just got yesterday, I think that, you know, we're talking about updating the JPA, well, the contents, the attachments rather, but it's just an old copy of the original JPA. And so I would encourage you, as you deliberate how you are going to potentially change this JPA, rather than taking public comment before you do that, to reopen the floor or even the comment period for
let me just say, Stephanie, that we'll have a chance to talk about that. That item will be coming up very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Okay. I want to thank you very, very much, Mr. Muller, and I really appreciate the discussion as we're having it here. I have got to say, having been on the Russian River Commission for a while, it's great to see this level of interest. We've had many a meeting when there were about 3 people in the audience, and at all of those meetings we heard presentations from the scientists and those who are very concerned about the health of this project. And I applaud those who have stayed interested low these many years and welcome those who are interested at this juncture. So with that, I think I'm going to take a quick bio break and we'll come back. I will give everybody, well, depending on how close the biofunction receptors are, let's say 10 minutes, okay? So is it all right?
You're finishing up this item? We're finishing up this item?
Yes, this item is finished.
Thank you.
There's no motion required, except to accept, Mr. Moles.
You can accept it. If I may, just one thing real quickly, and I respect where you're coming from. I don't want to have this back and forth in a bad way. Frivolous fears. No, not frivolous fears or concerns, but accusations of secret meetings and deals made and other things like that that are unfounded. That's different. Accusations and fears and concerns are far different. But once I get accused of also denying an accusation for which I didn't even know I was accused of, and that's written, it makes me wonder what the intent is. And I just have to be honest about that. Like, I've denied secret meetings that I didn't even know I was accused of. So just, I mean, I want you to know where I'm coming from. It's like, concerns are great. Bio break.
Wait a minute. I have to make a comment now. I have nothing in the processes that I have been involved in ever been involved in anything that wasn't absolutely according to the Brown Act, and every one of my colleagues handle it the same way. We make darn sure the public trust is upheld at every single step, and it's always been that way. And I wouldn't participate in anything else. And I just want to assure you that's the case. We're elected officials. I take that highly serious. And after 45 years of doing this business, that you cannot assail that principle. So with me, it ain't going to go any other way. And if I find that it does go that way, we're going to slip right back out and let everybody know we goofed. We're going back in the right direction. There's no changes necessary. We're going in the right direction. We're considering this, and we're considering the proper approach. And these are all elected officials up here. Every one of us already are responsive to the public. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. So just to let you know, that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Now I have to say something. I mean, you're moving me to tears, because as somebody who really is trying to make this work, and for all of us to get together in the same room and move forward in a positive way, it doesn't feel that great when you get that kind of feedback. And I think it's highly counterproductive. I would like to forgive and forget and move on. Let's do it. Let's get together and make this work. And at that, everybody, you've got 10 minutes and back to the discussion of the JPA. That'll be I did want to pick up, just before we go on to the next item, there was a question asked during public comment on item number 5, and that was regarding the profitability of the project. And I've asked Mr. Muller to at least give us what he can at such short notice.
All right, thank you. So words like profitability mean different things to different people. So it's a pretty, I'm just saying, there's some inherent vagueness in the question. However, I can provide some information that might be helpful to the questioner. For PG&E, this is not a project that makes sense for PG&E to have. And I explained some of the reasons why, and one of them is declining a load for PG&E to provide. So if we're in a situation where we have more generation than the load, obviously it reduces the value of the generation if we don't have customers for that. But it's the sort of thing that may look different to a different owner. So in the same way that the CCAs, community choice aggregation entities, right now are helping cause PG&E's load to decline, they're also looking for generation because their load is increasing, for example. So when you get into terms of profitability, the project produces a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of capacity that has certain values in the market, but how that translates into a concept like profitability has to do with what the buyer of that generation is willing to pay, and it also has to do with what the owner of the project incurs in terms of cost of operating the project. So I also mentioned that for PG&E, this is a relatively high cost project for us to operate because it's so distant from all our other hydro projects. For example, most of our hydro projects, there's nobody actually stationed there. They're monitored remotely. A roving operator comes by once every couple of days, or if there's an alarm or something that someone needs to be there. This one has full-time staff. So again, it depends. The cost side of the profitability question depends on the cost of the owner. For PG&E, it's a relatively expensive project to own. For another owner, it might not be so expensive, and the value of the generation is basically depends on who it's being sold to. So it's not a good fit for PG&E. Might be a good fit for somebody else. All the specifics on the amount of power generated and so on will all be provided in the information that's made public, and that would be in that first phase, public information. That's all public, but people have to make their own interpretation, not only in terms of power values now, but power values going forward. Do they go up? Do they go down? Do they stay constant? So it's a tough question. I can say for PG&E, it doesn't make sense to continue to own and operate the project. For another entity, it might.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, that will take us on to item number 6, and this is an informational update regarding Humboldt County Board of Supervisors draft policy statement regarding the future of the Potter Valley project. So we did have we created an ad hoc committee to come up with a policy statement. I am toying with the idea of reading it to you, but there are something in the line of 11 whereases and 9 policy statements. Suffice it to say that maybe I will, if you have time. Okay, great. So this was signed by the Humboldt County Chair of the Board, dated June 5th, which is just a few days ago. Whereas the Potter Valley project, currently owned by the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, was constructed on the main stem of the Eel River in Mendocino County between 1905. Okay, I'm not going to go into the history. Whereas the benefits of water diversions to the Russian River have come at the expense of substantial downstream impacts on the Eel River and its fisheries, and whereas the main stem of the Eel River flows through Humboldt County for approximately 81 river miles before discharging into the Pacific Ocean, and whereas the export of water from North Coast watersheds is one of Humboldt County's most significant water resource policy issues, and whereas the ecosystem services and beneficial uses of the Eel River are a vital part of Humboldt County's core community values, and whereas residents and communities within Humboldt County depend on the Eel River for water supply, fishing, recreation, and many other uses, and whereas the County of Humboldt recognizes the importance of the Eel River to the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, Blue Lake Rancheria, Round Valley Indian tribes, and other affected tribes for ceremonial, medicinal, practical, and subsistence uses. And whereas the Potter Valley Project has contributed to habitat degradation, declining fish populations, economic losses, and loss of recreational opportunities within Humboldt County, and whereas the Potter Valley Project has redistributed the natural wealth of the Eel River to the detriment of downstream communities in Humboldt County, and whereas the Potter Valley Project has deprived the residents of Humboldt County from fully utilizing the resources of the Eel River, and whereas PG&E's hydropower license for the Potter Valley Project expires on April 14, 2022, whereas Congressman Jared Huffman convened an ad hoc committee of interested parties in 2017 to work towards a two-basin solution that addresses issues and concerns in the Eel River and Russian River watersheds. And whereas PG&E announced on May 10, 2018, its intent to put the Potter Valley Project up for auction, and whereas the County of Humboldt has a duty as a political subdivision of the state of California to protect and restore the natural resources within county boundaries, now, therefore, be it resolved that the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors adopts the following position statement regarding the future of the Potter Valley Project. The County of Humboldt believes that decommissioning and full or partial removal of the Potter Valley Project is inevitable due to the aging infrastructure, low power production, and high cost of upgrading the facility to comply with current dam safety and environmental regulations. The County of Humboldt believes that restoration of fish populations in the Eel River will be best achieved through removal of Scott Dam to allow volitional fish passage to spawning and rearing habitat historically used by migrating salmonids. The County of Humboldt will actively participate in the hydropower relicensing process administered by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Congressman Jared Huffman's Potter Valley Project Ad Hoc Committee, and discussions exploring the potential transfer of the Potter Valley Project to a regional multi-county entity. The County of Humboldt recognizes that the Potter Valley Project provides tangible benefits to other counties and supports a collaborative approach to solving the regional issues and concerns. The County of Humboldt supports Congressman Huffman's call for a two-basin solution with co-equal goals and believes that consideration of Russian River water users' interests will be essential to achieving a comprehensive solution. The County of Humboldt will advocate strongly on behalf of the water users and natural resources within Humboldt County for water supply reliability, fish populations that support sustainable harvest opportunities, and full restoration of beneficial uses within the Eel River. The County of Humboldt will advocate for elimination of summer and fall water diversions and restoration of the Eel River's natural flow regime to restore and enhance fisheries, water quality, water supply, and recreational opportunities. The County of Humboldt will advocate for thorough consideration of the decommissioning alternative through the hydropower relicensing process. The County of Humboldt will advocate for PG&E or its successor to sponsor a participatory process involving all affected stakeholders prior to the submittal of a final relicensing application. The County of Humboldt will advocate for technical studies that fully address the primary concerns for Eel River watershed health and sustainability, which include fish passage necessary for access to spawning and rearing habitat above Scott Dam, fish passage survival at Cape Horn Dam for both adults and juveniles, downstream geomorphic effects on environmental cues, flow and temperature, for migrating salmonids and other fish species, environmental cues, flow and temperature, second time I read that, and effects on invasive species such as the Sacramento pike minnow, effects on tribal uses and resources, and effects on downstream municipal, domestic, and agricultural water supply. With regard to a potential regional entity assuming operation of the facility, the County of Humboldt will advocate for full recovery of the county's costs, protection from liability, fair and equitable representation in the governance structure, and assurances that the need of the Eel River and downstream communities will be satisfied. That's stated June 5th. And I'm sorry to put you all through that, but I think it's important for you guys to understand where we're coming from in Humboldt County. And I'm really going to take the privilege of being chair to invite the Wiyot tribe to read out the, or whatever portion thereof, of their resolution sent to the Eel Russian River Commission. Welcome, Chair Hernandez.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Fennell, Commissioners. So, the Wiyot tribe is presenting the resolution 1805. I didn't bring my reading glasses today. So, whereas the Wiyot tribe federally recognized Indian tribe within inherent bound powers and self-government protect the federal law of the tribe's constitution, and whereas the Wiyot Tribal Council is a governing body of the Wiyot tribe under the authority of the Constitution of the tribe, and whereas the Wiyot tribe depends and historically depends on the water and fishery resources of the Eel River within the tribe's ancestral territories for subsistence and cultural purposes, and whereas the Eel River has been decimated by hydroelectric dams, diversions into the Russian River, disruptive forestry and grazing practices, unlawful diversions of water for cannabis growth, overfishing, population pollution, and residential and commercial development. And whereas the Wiyot tribe is interested in working with neighboring governments and stakeholders to find a regional solution that meets the goals of restoring the Eel and Russian River to healthy rivers ecosystem, and whereas the counties of Humboldt, Mendocino, Lake, Sonoma have entered into a joint exercise of powers agreement for the formulation of the implementation of the Eel and Russian River watershed conservation and development plan, joint powers agreement, and have found the Eel Russian River Commission for the purpose, and whereas California state law authorizes federally recognized tribes to enter into a joint powers agreement with other public agencies under California Government Code Section 6500. Whereas the Wiyot tribe participation as a member of the Eel River Commission will promote the tribe's goal of the Eel River's restoration. Now therefore be it resolved that Chairman Ted Hernandez and the staff of the Wiyot tribe are authorized to formally request that the Eel Russian River Joint Power Agreement be amended to provide the membership for the Wiyot tribe, and be it further resolved that the Wiyot tribe seeks to participate as a member of the Eel Russian River Commission without any requirements of initial or ongoing financial contribution to the budget of the commission, and be it further resolved that nothing in this resolution or participation of the Wiyot tribe in the work of the Eel Russian River Commission shall be construed as waiving the sovereign immunity from the suit enjoyed by the tribe, the tribal council, employees, agents, and members or consultants, and be it further resolved that if the joint exercise power agreement for the formulation and implementation of the Eel Russian River watershed conservation and development plan is amended to provide for the membership of the Wiyot tribe, Chairman Ted Hernandez is authorized to sign such amended agreements on the tribe's behalf.
Thank you. And just for the record, that is Chairman Ted Hernandez speaking, and Michelle Vassell and I forget your title, Michelle.
Tribal Administrator.
She's the one that makes me do this stuff.
Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate that. And I think that reading of your resolution is a perfect bridge to the next item on the agenda, unless I have any other presentations from the other counties on this. Okay, great. On to item number 7, which is an ad hoc committee report on the review of the Eel Russian River Commission Joint Powers Agreement. And this is an action item. The presenters are myself and Commissioner Gore. Commissioner Gore, do you want to say anything on this before we move forward?
Well, to start off, I mean, even though it says an action item, we're not, you know.
It's got potential for action.
It's got potential for action because realistically, this is, you know, and I really appreciate the start off the conversation with this. You know, this whole discussion began, I think, when Commissioner Brown, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, sent out the bylaws or the actual forming of the JPA. And, you know, we had a discussion at that time during commissioner report outs and other things, and thanked you for bringing that forward. We agendized it a couple times, and it really was a discussion that we shouldn't be the ones making all these decisions, right? Or we shouldn't be the ones leading even the dialogue and the agenda making for all of this. And really, what does that mean? Because we have the Weok tribe, we have other tribes on both sides of the river system when we talk about this really being a 2-basin system. And then on the other side, we have Ukiah, Cloverdale, Healdsburg, smaller unincorporated communities like Geyserville and others. We have irrigation districts. We now have groundwater management plans in Ukiah, and actually a potential listing of Alexander Valley. So, I mean, there's a lot of governance and a lot of things. And I think the question I want to say for Estelle with this is really what's the right fit? Because if we talk about that, then what we're talking about is a 15-member group, right? What we also talked about was, would it be more appropriate to have rotating spots for some, for instance, for incorporated cities? If there's 3 cities along kind of in Mendocino County and Sonoma County that are incorporated cities, is there a rotation there? One of the things that I mentioned to Commissioner Estelle as well was would it be good to get, instead of just go after different, I'm not talking about the tribal side right now, but I'm talking more about the cities and the other unincorporated areas, is to maybe consider getting a board member from what's called the Russian River Watershed Association, right? Where we actually have, on our side, appointees, and the fiscal sponsor is Ukiah, and you have people from the city of Ukiah. You have people up and down the river. I mean, is that the right place to do it? So I would say there's more of a discussion to be had than answers right here. You know, we don't have, Supervisor Fennell and I do not have a specific list of recommendations, but more is a desire to say we need to have the tribes represented at the table as sovereign entities and as partners in progress going forward. And we need to figure out a place for this either Russian River Watershed Association or those members therein. And so with that being said, I kind of want to pass it back to my colleague on the ad hoc and see, you know, if you want to open it up to discussion from the other members or how you want to go forward from right now.
Yeah, I would definitely like to open it up to discussion from the other members. And I also think it's important to kind of memorialize why we're doing this. First of all, this talk of a regional entity is something of that nature. We already have a regional entity with joint powers memorialized, actually having to do with the management of the watersheds, which is really interesting. So the idea is, as we move forward, do we want to just sit as this 4-member commission that kind of just goes along and hears the process and kind of keeps tabs on the process and gets presentations? Or do we offer this entity as the seed, if you will, to a regional entity that might take this on. So that's one discussion. The other discussion is that any changes that we make, and so the other part of our ad hoc committees, what we were instructed to do was to look at the idea of broadening the Eel Russian River Commission, which is what you're touching on. And as clearly noted, the Wiyot tribe would like to be part of the Eel Russian River Commission. What's important to note is that any changes to the Eel River Russian Commission must be ratified by all the member agencies, which in this case would be all 4 counties. And so any changes we would make to membership or any aspects of the JPA would have to go back for a buy-in from all of our various counties. So it's complex, but it's at least the beginning of a conversation. And I think the big kernel in here is, what do we, as individual representatives on this, see as the value of this commission as we move forward? And I'll go to Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. But I think what is lost is where we have forgotten that the Redwood Valley tribe has represented tribal interests on this particular project through FERC forever. Not for or against expanding, but we do have 13 tribes, Pomo tribes. Round Valley is one of them. They have an organization and a council that makes up Pomos in Lake County, Mendocino County, and Sonoma County. So to pick out who's who and what's what, but I will say the Redwood Valley tribe, as always, you saw it in a PowerPoint today, when Noah Fisheries spoke, they actually have more say than this commission does over the project and what happens and what doesn't happen with the studies and for instance, the block releases. Pulse releases, I guess, is what we had this spring. So I do want to bring that up. And this entity has been formed and operating, holding meetings since the late 70s. There's never been an interest like this before. So will it continue as we move into the future? But bottom line is, I don't have any suggestions on either side, but I don't want anyone to think that tribal interests are lost. And I guess the final comment I have, and maybe it's in response to Humboldt County's resolution, I just really want to emphasize the fact that Mendocino County is the only county that has both watersheds. Yeah. So we do have a strong interest for both sides. But I had to bring that up, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Steele?
Well, Lake County has the headwaters. Just saying. You know, it's an okay. And we actually Lake County provides water in 4 different directions. You know, I just want to make a mention that the world is changing. We get a representation of Lake County now that's quite unique moving forward in just a very short period of time. We have a tribal chair that's on the board. I have a tribal chair that's my planning commissioner. He's now 30 votes ahead and becoming the 2nd tribal chair on the board, and that'll be unique, historical situation in California for having 2 at one time on a board. That tribal chair would be representing District 3, which is my district now, which includes Lake Pillsbury. And we have never shied away from exchanging and interchanging views and governmental responsibilities with the tribes. It's becoming stronger today. They're kind of moving more towards the form of government that they understand works, and we're moving more towards an inclusive form of government that helps it work. So that's what I would say about the tribal interests. I believe that they have the kind of view that we need to have in government with regard to resources. Now, as to the JPA, JPAs form, and they change as the responsibilities change. We just formed a new JPA, or in the process of it, in Lake County. It has to do with fire risk reduction, with all of our fire people coming together, our tribes coming together, and the county coming together with CAL FIRE and so forth, 4 fire districts, to form a new JPA in order to reduce risk so that we can have homes that are reduced risk within a high-risk environment. And we're in an extremely high-risk environment in Lake County. So we acknowledged all of that, decided we've got to find a way to move forward. Well, this is another move forward kind of decision to make, where we take our JPA, in my view, it's already represented by 4 counties. We find a way to be inclusive with everybody, and then take that next step. Now, the next step approach, just as a way of putting it on the table, might be for different commissioners to take under their umbrella different aspects of the vote. In other words, there's 4 votes, but there's going to be subgroups to bring information forward, and one or the other commissioner would take them under the wing as a overseer of the process, and then bring that forward and then to represent it at the main group. Actually, I do this in a couple of places within Lake County right now. I have councils, and the council members within my very large district, it's so large the rest of the districts would fit inside of it. So I had to break it up, and I broke it up into 3. I have one of my council members here today. The council members will actually say, I will champion that particular issue going forward. They'll work with it, they'll bring it to a fruition, they'll bring it back to the council, then they'll vote it forward for the board, in this case, for the board to take it on as a final vote for whatever legal entity the board wants to bring to it. But it actually could be this JPA. So if you're going to make a decision on fisheries or water, or take down the dams, or whatever you're going to do, you argue it out in this arena, and argue it out wholly for all of the different values. And I think if you'll probably find going forward that there is some central values that will rise to the top that are different today than there were back in the day when it was all about power, which put the dams in play in the first place. And then it became about water, which put agriculture in play. And the very last value, which is probably the most valuable, which should have been in front of all of that, was the fisheries, because those are natural values you cannot afford to lose. You can't get them back. You have to protect your natural resources. And in fact, if you were to look at the rural counties of California, the economics of all of those counties depend on their natural resources, their natural attributes, and then the way that people live on the landscape in a natural way that protects all those features. And that's basically your future going forward. And one of the values that I bring forward to everybody from the tribes, often as I can, is that they look 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, and that's how they plot out their course. You look at the 7 generations back, you wouldn't be too happy about what you look forward as your options, but you in fact can plot out the best options by changing the values. For me, the #1 value ought to be the fisheries. Everything else ought to react to that. And I think this JPA, with that written right into its bylaws, as these are the values that we are going to hold the highest in sequence, can make decisions going forward. You cannot do something on this river system that harms your natural resources. You've got to have that first, and everything else has to adjust and can adjust. You're going to have droughts going forward. You're going to have flood years going forward. All of those things need to be within the scope of how you plan. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking dams out. It means looking at dams in a different way. And taking a dam out may be, in fact, the only way you can do it, and it may, in fact, not be. When you look at Clear Lake, for instance, it's a natural water system. We have a 7-foot dam that raises Clear Lake a little bit. It's a headwaters lake, and it clearly is a value as a headwaters lake that is measurable. you could, if you wanted to drain the lake and make it a valley, you'd want to probably put a dam back in and reinstall the lake because it is so valuable to the downstream and the local resources. So you have to take these things into consideration. And just saying Scott Dam should be taken out without even looking at it as a valuable headwaters lake and being a ground charge resource as recharging the groundwater so that you get lake water coming back into the system downstream and recharging all those fisheries all along the way, you're basically doing yourself a disservice. You have to look at all these things. So from my standpoint, you look at values, you say what your values are, you reform your JPA, and then you move forward with all your subgroups advising you as to how to best make those decisions.
Will point out, and I really appreciate hearing that. I think it's great that the discussion is happening. It's on everybody's mind. I didn't know whether or not I should read that into the record, but we've come into so much scrutiny. I really want people to understand the bottom line. You'll understand also as part of that resolution that collaboration is the key word, and I think we all recognize the value of both watersheds, and that's why people have actually looked favorably on this two-basin solution type thing. But to the core issue is what is the role of the Eel Russian River Commission? I mean, do we, at least at this point, expand it to include others? Do we expand it in the way that Commissioner Steele mentioned, where you have subgroups per each county or something like that? And even if there is no role for the Eel Russian River Commission to play in the Potter Valley acquisition, what is our role as this moves forward? And I think that's a real key issue to tease out. You know, even if there's no, I would say if there is a point where a regional entity starts talking with PG&E, that's not going to happen just by us clicking our fingers. And who is stepping forward right now, we don't know. So at least if we understand the value of this group of people who can talk to each other in public about all of the various interests, I think that's a very valuable consideration. Commissioner Brown.
Well, this body it's always been a forum.
Exactly.
To keep the 4 counties together,
Yep.
Looking at both watersheds. We've really taken no action on anything.
Except in support of studies.
It's in support of studies for grant funding, like for ERP, and then actually touring restored areas and talking about the value and why it was done, etc. But that's what we've been, is just always the forum. And I believe that's why it was put together originally, because it was the first 50-year relicensing. And I think that started in the early 70s. We formed in 1978. And that's why I wanted to bring this forward, because I wanted to know what else are we supposed to be doing, and are we meeting all the original requirements. But I don't know about expansion, because it's a forum, and who hasn't had, unless we're taking serious action, perhaps to become a part of the project or the next owner of the project with zones of benefit. But I don't, I think everyone can have their input. Obviously, we had a tribe come forward today. We always look for agenda items of interest to 4 bodies. I brought up the fact that Round Valley Tribe has very strong input, and they are a part of 13 other tribes within Lake, Mendocino, and Sonoma County. So I'm assuming they talk about it. If not, they probably will as we move into the future. The cities, it's the same thing. There is, during the drought, we had the upper Russian River water managers, and we met quite regularly. We needed to discuss how, the water was going to last us through the historic drought and what we could do to our infrastructure, what conservation measures we needed to take. And it wasn't divided by political lines because we were all in it together. So I really don't know where to go. Certainly, if we start expanding, I could see us even getting into bigger groups. So I'm just not quite sure which way I would want to go. And I'm going to do whatever my governing body, which is the Board of Supervisors for the county, directs me to do.
Let me ask a question. There is no governing body without the will of the people. We just simply cannot. You don't exist unless people allow you to exist, and that powers believe that you're going to do the right thing. So the folks that are out there are going to be the recipient of the best will of whatever happens out of this. Want the entity working for them, but they want an entity working for them. And what better group than the basic government structure that you already have in place? If you reform the whole thing, it's pretty much, and by the way, I teach this, so as far as governance, we have so many layers of government in California. It's just absolutely amazing. And we used to get exchange students coming over and asking just, how do you guys govern yourselves? Because you've got hundreds of layers that all come together. Well, it's all the will of the people, and it's all focused on specific projects so that the outcomes benefit the most folks. And so you have to have private and public entities come together. You have to have traditional entities come together, or they can't survive either. And the tribes have realized that they've been here in a historical way, but they have to work together with the new governments that are here. There's just too many people. So with all of that said, I like to take, personally, I like to take what's already in place. I like to transform it if it's working. This is not one that hasn't worked, it's one that has worked because you've been here and actually, and I haven't, of course. Lake County has not been here as much as they should be. But
they've always had a seat.
But we've always had a seat, right? And then you strong-armed me so that I would start attending.
Right, we dragged you.
It was a strong army. And so here I am. But here's the thing. From the standpoint of the best outcomes, you really do need a forum that represents the most people in the government structure that is the strongest, and of course that would be the county government. That's why this subset of the county government forming this commission under a JPA really is one that could work. So what I would look forward to is reforming the JPA just to see if you could bring that power together by virtue of tapping into the federal government resources, by tapping into the tribal resources, to see if you can find that resonance with everybody to move forward with the right monetary power and the right outcome for everyone, including the agriculture, which is absolutely the substance underneath all of this. We have to be raising food. We have to be providing water to the people who are on the landscape. But you have to have a principal virtue in front of that. It's not just producing power now. That has to move down the scale, and there has to be something that actually drives these streams. My view is that since we have listed these fish, it has become fish standard for the streams, and that's actually fits federal law, fits local law, and that's why I say the fish standard probably is what should drive the water power. This JPA could basically be the voice for all of that.
Commissioner Gore?
Chicken or the egg? I mean, we could talk this in circles, right? Mm-hmm. I think, a couple things. One is I really like the mention of the role and the what. What are we trying to do? Role, values, what is it? And then have the JPA, the future of the JPA, support that. Because vice versa, if we just say, hey, let's reformulate a JPA and go out and ask for people's input, then where's that going to take us? I go back to kind of this discussion is so, okay, what do we want to do? Would we want to get funding to be able to help restoration projects up and down and decide that? that's better to go through the North Coast Resource Partnership. If we wanted to do something for this project, it'd be better to go somewhere where they have a functional, and create an ad hoc through that and do it, because it's got a great tribal council and engagement and other things, right? I mean, why create another vehicle that does some similar stuff as opposed to supporting that and creating an offshoot? Number two, if it's if it's not funding, if it's more about, like you say, is ownership of a project. I go back to, I can't remember his name, I think it was Mr. Greason, right? Came up and said, well, you should just disband this JPA. Well, it'd be a hell of a lot easier to put together I don't say easier because it'd be worse for public input, but to create a solution, for us to put together a proposal. And I don't mean because of public input, but because I mean because of minutes and Brown Act stuff. You can't, when you're a JPA and a formal JPA, and how long it takes for you to get back together and agendize and do things and like go for all this review, it's not functional to be a business entity unless that business is staffed, right? Unless there's direction and there's funding and other things. And I just don't see us having that or wanting to build that capacity. So I kind of go back to what Commissioner Brown said, which is it has served as a forum. And if we use that innate kind of ability to start to set a forum that isn't just for updates on biology and aquatic life or discussions about the future of the Potter Valley project, but if we kind of take it to a larger aspect and have maybe a special meeting where we invite a lot of these entities and kind of have a presentation of what we've done, what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, different interests along this area, whether we do that as something with this whole board or whether we do it as an ad hoc, it needs to be explored more. I mean, my first thing is I would say, instead of just going through and changing the JPA, for instance, I'm fully supportive of giving you a spot, but why would I open the JPA for one and then try and open it up later? And I think we should give ourselves 6 months to a year to like maybe host these kinds of discussions that informs the whole reformulation of a JPA and see if it's a value. So if I'm this is a long way to say, for me, I think the normal meetings that we have, we should consider hosting a couple of meetings that are really forum meetings for this kind of area with the different people, education, getting back to a basic level, bringing understanding about what are the impacts on 15 plus tribes, 4 counties, multiple cities and jurisdictions, and kind of getting it back to basic, because that could also support whatever happens with the Potter Valley project. Is that, and I want to link just one thing back to your statement, your resolution. I respect your resolution. You're in Humboldt County. Your water comes through a tunnel over into another county. Why wouldn't you want to keep it all there, right? But we're in a pickle that's 120 years in the making, and now we're trying to figure out, I mean, as you'll say, we're trying to respectfully say, if we have hundreds of millions of dollars on restoration projects and dams that only fill up based off of that diversion, then how do we really get to a 2-basin, 3-county, multi-tribe solution? So, I guess it's a long way of saying, I think we need to start to try and use this forum to either take us out to the EEL forum or Russian River and bring these people together and say, where are our commonalities and what are our values, and back to what you said. And then it'll come out of that. And we'll have to decide if this is relevant, if we need 4 tribal seats, if we need to have a separate tribal council that has the same rights as us and we come and meet together. That's my thought. So more meetings.
Yeah, I agree.
But the right kind.
When this first was pumping its head up, we knew that the federal relicensing process was being kicked off. I mean, the first thing that entered to my mind is we have to have more meetings. I know that's a joy to hear, but that's, we can't just have 3 meetings a year or 2 meetings a year. We have an obligation. I mean, the foundation of the JPA mentions that the watershed, that an Eel River watershed conservation and development plan is our task. Our powers are authorized in our own name to do all the acts necessary for the exercise of that. I think that there's Article 3, which is the purpose.
Please,
plan to promote,
could you please say page so
yeah,
people
Article
can follow?
3 is on page 4, and it's the purpose. A plan to promote proper watershed conservation and flood control measures and provide measure to achieve proper economic stimulus and development in the Eel and Russian River watersheds for the general benefit of all the people in the participating counties by establishing a separate Eel Russian River Commission and by vesting this commission with power to effectively aid, assist, and coordinate the formulation, administration, and implementation of the Eel Russian River Commission. So the bottom line goes exactly to what we were talking about, which is that this was an idea that was actually cobbled together in 1978, but it's being asked to step up at this point where that's more important. So Commissioner Brown.
You can call me Carrie. You're a young'un. With the plan itself, I believe that is why they went together, not realizing what the FERC process was, because it was their first venture for all 4 counties. And when they found out that there were certain studies associated with it, I believe everything stopped, because we have been through boxes of information trying to find a plan, and the former commissioners I've asked, they went, nope, don't think we did that, but can't remember why. And the only one that I know that may remember, again, is Don Tuttle, because he was secretary to this body for years. And so anyway, having said that, but going to Commissioner Steele's suggestion of subcommittees, I just recently, we had some planning issues in one area of my district, Redwood Valley, and one way to have good community input and how their communities develop was to appoint what we call a MAC, Municipal Advisory Council. And I did, and for the Wiyot tribe, this particular area contains 2 tribes. And I made sure that the Redwood Valley tribe and Coyote Valley tribe each had a seat, because I felt that was really important and went forward with that. So there are lots of ways you can do subgroups and what have you, but this is an initial discussion. And I would rather have the bullet points and discuss it with our respective bodies that appoint us to this commission and get their input, because I think that's what I originally said. I can't move forward on anything really without my body. You know,
I mean, but as Supervisor, as Commissioner Gore said, you know, in our discussions, we just realized that the enormity of this ask, and really felt like there should be a more robust discussion among all 4 of us in terms of just exactly what we were trying to do. I mean, definitely we can go through this and reflect what the JPA says. If we want to change it, we have to go to our boards. There's no doubt about that. If we want to broaden it, same question. So is there a general sense that we want to remain actively involved and aid the discussion, as Commissioner Gore said, you know, something like creating these forums where all of the various entities can get together and discuss various aspects of it?
Well, I think I would suggest that what we should do is set up some kind of a forum meeting where we go through this and we formally invite, from you as the chair, the other entities, the different tribal members. We invite the folks from the Russian River Watershed Association. We invite others. And I'm not saying like we have a full intention of what it is, but what it would be is to get together and get back to basics. Be a presentation for a lot of people who don't know the connectedness between these watersheds and these things. This is a regional system, and we can say, yes, the Potter Valley is a driver for a lot of the discussions here, the Potter Valley projects, but get some of those folks together and get really a forum, and I would say, you know, go through, towards the end of that, here's the options we have before us. One is do what we're doing. Number two, which is status quo. Number two is disband a JPA. Right? Because the only reason I say that is because is it effective for a forum to be a Brown Act organization? I mean, for the most part, we just receive reports and kind of do stuff, you know? And then in between that is all of these other discussions, right? Of what do we want to be? Would we see ourselves as being a procurer of dollars into restoration projects, of other things? And we're not going to figure all that in a forum, but at least we'd be able to kind of put those out and say, here's our 3 to 4 recommendations. And I'd love to work with you as a vice chair, kind of come up with an agenda for that, and honor the requests that are coming, but get other folks at the table. And I think that would inform what's next. And then at that time, it covers, I think, a good track with where we're at with Potter Valley, because we're obviously going to have to continue to have our meetings on the public area to do that. And we'd say, okay, like later, I mean, it'd be good to have like a forum sometime before the end of the year that brings a lot of these people together and says, Cloverdale, do you know this is relevant to you or not? Or you tell us if you think it's relevant to you or not. So before we break up into committees and do other things, I think it'd be better to get a lot of do an invite, get a lot of folks together, remind ourselves why we're here, and start from scratch.
Commissioner Steele?
Yeah, I don't disagree with the things I've heard. I just think there needs to be things added. You were reading, and I was hoping you were going to get to number 2. So let me read number 2.
Yeah, please.
You stopped a little short.
It's on that same page 4.
Yeah, it's Article 3, purpose. And purpose is really important. You can change a lot of things, but you really want to be sure that you get your intent and purpose correct. And number 2 says to establish appropriate operating and advisory committees to conduct public hearings to assist the Commission in carrying out the foregoing purposes, and to assist the Commission in the implementation of projects and programs to improve the quality of life in the area. It's all good, but you have to have some power to be able to do that. And we've just said that, and power is money, and all of that, and the will of the people has to be there. So people have to believe in what you're doing, so you do have to go down that line. If I were going to have meetings with groups to find out if we're on the right track, I'd go back to what I originally said. What are the hierarchy of principles that you'd like to see applied to the Eel and Russian River system, so that you can then have your questions fall out of those principles? All of that has changed. This commission was formed after those principles actually had been enacted. The dams were in place, all the other things, the diversions, agriculture, everything else moved in on top of you. So you really need to establish those principles. Then you need to see if anyone wants to say, whether it's the federal government, because right now there's a hearing involving Jared Huffman, Congressman Huffman, with some vague purpose. I cannot figure out the purpose. It seems to me that what they're saying is they're going to inform the FERC operation, and that's the principle. But yet, when you look at everything that they're studying, it does not look that way. It looks like they have a preordained approach, and all the information and studies and the people that are applied there are going to then go in that direction simply by virtue of that's the way it's been set up. You have to start with a hierarchy of principles that everybody agrees with, and it's not just fish passage. It's not just agriculture. It's not just tribal ceremony. It's there are some key operating principles that you have to agree with. And you have to have those discussions amongst in an open forum. And what better open forum place than an open forum that's been ruled by the Brown Act, which says you don't conduct any business unless it's in the public eye. I think it's exactly the right way to go. So I believe in this because I've been at this so long and I've seen it work, and I've seen people back up. And the Brown Act is very forgiving. If you, in fact, go in the wrong direction and somebody points it out, you're allowed to back up correct your operation and go forward. And I think that's exactly what you have to do when you've got people involved. But in any case, I think the first thing to do is to have those meetings. I agree with everybody with regard to future meetings, and try to see if the public wants to give you some salute or wants to continue to say this is the wrong avenue. But basically, I would be asking the question, what are the hierarchy of principles that you'd like to see the Russian and the eel operate on? And then how would you see that play out with regard to how people live on the landscape with, vis-a-vis with the river system? Because this, you cannot replace a river system. Once you mess up the river system, it's pretty hard going backward, just like we're having the same discussion in a delta. It kept running up against the principles of losing the components that made it what it was, in a unique way. It's the same with all rural counties. You have to decide what the principles are of those counties, and you have to protect those things, and those are natural resources. So that's the way I would do it. I would ask for the hierarchy of principles discussion and bring everybody forward to see if you could agree on something.
I think that the hierarchy of principles is one. Also, we keep on discussing, we hear it discussed by PG&E, we hear it discussed by Congressman Huffman and his ad hoc committee, this idea of a regional entity. And I'm not aware of any other entity aside from the Eel Russian River Commission, which is ourselves, and Congressman Huffman's ad hoc group that has been looking at that regional entity, and maybe if we have a forum, we'll find out there's somebody else doing it too. There probably are some things happening in secret that we're not aware of. Commissioner Brown.
Yes, and Mendocino County has Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, and the inland water managers were together, the different districts, municipalities, the county, talking about what type of organization that would bring all those entities together. Mm-hmm. That's what we have. And it came together very quickly, late 70s, no, 90s. And it came together very quickly because PG&E was in court, bankruptcy court, and the Potter Valley project was put with a grouping of Sierra hydropower projects and going to be put on the auction block. And so our entity quickly formed in case it was. And that did not happen. PG&E pulled back. But that entity still meets today and does considerable work in the Russian River watershed, as well as discussing issues in the Eel River and beyond. So there is an entity like that. And
that's definitely an entity that should be involved in any forum.
Well, and they may be looking at, the Potter Valley project, because their JPA gives them the ability. Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. Mm-hmm. That's part of their JPA.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That's very.
I thought I'd better, for disclosure,
No, that's really good. I mean,
it's the county, the city of Ukiah,
agency. We got all sorts of people.
Russian River Flood Control, Redwood Valley Water District, and I think Potter Valley Irrigation District, where I live.
Yeah, Potter Valley Irrigation District. Yeah.
Sorry, Janet.
Okay, well, you're out. I think we've had a fairly robust discussion now. I'd like to throw this open to the public if anybody has any ideas and guidance for us on how we.
Suggestions?
Yeah, any suggestions? Yeah. Anybody like to speak to us on this item?
Hi. My name is Virginia Graziani. I'm a former resident of Humboldt County and a current resident of Lake County. I just want to suggest to you that maybe it would be a good idea to hold a meeting of this commission totally dedicated to this subject. Where is this commission going? Because you have a lot of important things to discuss, but it seems to all boil down to this. And I just wanted to throw out a thought I had that I probably haven't formulated very articulately because it just occurred to me listening to this discussion. But I know that in both Humboldt and Lake counties, and it's probably true to a certain extent in Mendocino and Sonoma as well, there's a lot of talk about breaking away from the state of California because there is a rural-urban split, and a lot of people who live in rural areas feel like they're not adequately represented in California because the urban areas dominate by population density. You are faced with the same situation here, but it isn't because of an urban-rural split. So it is a little bit kind of an urban-rural split because Sonoma and Mendocino are more, quote, urban than Lake and Humboldt County are. However, it's really a watershed split. And it still comes down to the fact that the Eel River has a very large watershed below Van Arsdale, below Cape Horn Dam, but it has a smaller population, and it has, therefore, less representation on this commission, with all due respect to the fact part of it is in Mendocino County, and that's the part that probably is seriously affected by the diversion of water out of the Eel River. But it's only in Humboldt County that we only have the Eel River. I hope you're following what I'm saying, because I'm not sure I am. But I know what my point is, and my point is that I still feel that the Eel River itself is underrepresented on this council just by numbers of commissioners, and I think that in order to have a fair discussion, there has to be some way of bringing some balance to this. Thank you.
There's 3 to 1. It's Humboldt, Mendocino, and Lake. Is that right? I'm just asking a question. What's the imbalance? It's Lake, Mendocino. You're part of the Eel, and in Humboldt.
But Mendocino has a great deal of the Russian River. I'm sorry. Mendocino has a great deal of the Russian River.
Oh, you mean by miles of river? That's
and
what
most of its population in the Russian River watershed. Sonoma is entirely within the Russian River watershed because of that, and Lake County is. We've got Lake Pillsbury, but we don't have the lower part of the Eel River.
Yeah.
It's late, low blood sugar, but I think you know what I mean.
I got you this time. I thought you meant by numbers, but you meant by miles of river.
I meant by river.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
After David speaks, because he's been waiting.
Appreciate that. Thank you. David Keller, Friends of the Eel River. First of all, I want to thank Humboldt County and We Are Tribe for their recent resolutions and statements of clarity on the values and the importance of restoring and protecting and making more prolific the Eel River and its resources. It's a very important step, and I appreciate that. Regarding this commission, I think, as Commissioner Gore says, what you're doing has to be completely public, has to be completely transparent, and establishing values, principles. That's obviously a large conversation. Welcome to Western water. It ain't easy. It's conflict, it's mutual interests, it's money, or as somebody said, water flows uphill towards money. And so I think you have some very important work to do in establishing principles and values of where you go forward, particularly in regards to what happens to PVP. And in looking at what happens to PVP, who has the liabilities? Does PG&E fix all of their liabilities before they turn over the project, or are they looking for somebody to bail them out? Right now it looks like there's somebody to bail them out. And those liabilities are huge, as I mentioned earlier. So you'd be looking at who gets the risks, who gets the benefits, and who pays. All of those 3 questions are politically answered questions and not engineering questions. And it's important for you to have your values and principles clear, because if there is another owner of the project, whether it's public, private, partnership, or whatever, foreign or U.S., somebody's got to look after your principles and values. And if it's another entity that is not subject to jurisdictional regulation by FERC, you guys are going to have to be on your toes to protect not only the environment and your resources and your economy, but also your voters and ratepayers. So I really, it's a large task. I appreciate that. And I also urge you to strongly support and participate as you can in Congressman Huffman's process. His intent is to look for a consensus two-basin solution. Because without consensus, it's years of legal work, it's huge expenses, and somebody else will grab it. And it won't be the general public, it won't be our environment, it won't be our economy, it won't be our fishermen, it won't be our tribes, it'll be somebody else's business. So Jared's process has some 30 stakeholders. I think we're making very significant progress in sorting out what are the issues, what are the parameters, what has to be addressed, and where choices can be made in solutions, and hopefully coming to a consensus. So I really strongly urge you to participate and support that process. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else in the public want to discuss this?
Commissioner Brown. So I heard what you said about your two tribes working together, and that's great. But I also have to state that the three tribes, the three way-out tribes, work well together as well for natural resources. As well as this commission was formed in 1978, you have to recognize the tribes were not recognized until the late 80s. If we were recognized in the 70s, you would be having tribal members sitting there. Because we are in the Constitution of the United States to be able to sit on these commissions. So, you know, that's a little history there. 78, we weren't recognized. 1980, 81, we got tribe was recognized. So we didn't have a voice. We didn't have a say. But now that we are recognized, the tribes are coming together and working together to save our watersheds, to save our rivers, not just the Eel, the Russian, because we know the importance of the natural resource on it. And we see the damage that it's getting caused. So I just want you to take that into consideration as well.
Well, and I think I prefaced that by saying I have to take it back to my appointing body, and they're going to give me the direction. And then the other point I was trying to make, we have many tribes that would be interested in a seat. That was the other point.
No, I understand.
And I
your
was
points.
recognizing the Ram Valley tribe.
Mm-hmm.
For years, they have represented the tribal voice in the FERC process, and have, what would you say, a more elevated position in doing so than local government in any county. So I just wanted to reaffirm what I was saying.
No, I understand, but as well as, you know, we work well with Brown Valley as well, as a sister tribe and a tribe that lives on the river as well. But what I want to make this commission understand is this. Our rivers are our lifelines and our bloodlines for any indigenous community out there. That's what kept us alive. That's what fed us. That's what kept our crops alive. We lived off those rivers. They were the main bloodlines for any indigenous person you know. And that's why you see the indigenous nations protecting their waters. Because if we don't have water, we don't have life.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
I understand. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission. So, oh, sorry. If anybody else is thinking of making some public comment, maybe they can make their way.
Hi, Vivian Hallowell, Watershed Conservation Director of Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, known as PCFFA. And we represent small boat commercial fishermen up and down the coast. I want to thank you all for your discussion today, setting values based on natural resources is a reasonable approach, because that is what we all rely on for our economy and our ecology, private and public interest. I support the words of David Keller about all of this, what he just said, and I thank you especially, Commissioner Steele, for your emphasis on natural resources. I want to thank Humboldt County for your resolution, and the Way Out Tribe as well, because of your recognition that in order to have fisheries, you have to have a surplus above a viable population of salmon. And I wanted to address Commissioner Steele's question from earlier about the weak stock approach and value of the eel in the ocean fishery. Our president of our organization, David Bitts, is the salmon advisor on the salmon technical team at the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. And we have very conservative fisheries management on the West Coast. We're proud that we don't have any overfishing of stocks in the ocean except in international waters where we can't control everything here on the West Coast. And we have ocean fisheries recovering, like rockfish, some of which were below their optimum, by leaving them alone and closing areas. The crab fishery is doing well also. The salmon fishery, not so well. They have to go up the rivers. So the statistic that you were looking for, Mr. Bitts said, is that in about half of all years, the California coastal fall run Chinook, which has been listed as threatened for almost 20 years, is a constraining stock in the ocean fishery rather than coho. And in those years, not only do we have 41 miles of coastline that's completely closed, but we also have less Klamath fish that we can catch in those years. 10 to 15,000 less Klamath fish, which translates, because of the mixed stock fishery that we're fishing on in the ocean, to 100,000 to 150,000 ocean fish that were restricted from catching and landing into Eureka and Crescent City and Trinidad.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to say, I go back to the days of Zeke Grader and Nat Bingham, so I'm familiar with all this, and I was baiting the question a little bit, and you know that, because that's exactly what we have to do, is we have to look at it from the standpoint of the value of these fisheries as to the ocean returns. And bless you for all the good work you've done. Your organization has been around forever, and it's been a good organization, a steward of the resource.
Thank you. We support a robust recovery of Eel River and Russian River fisheries. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the commission, and Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, I'm curious. What does Humboldt do with Trinity County, and do you have a stakeholders group for Ruth Lake, Ruth Reservoir, and the entire Mad River? I know you have a hatchery very close to Arcata, and that's the only fish ladder there. I mean, do you have a stakeholders group that meets on that, watches the conservation, and, you know, goes over the science and restoration?
Yeah, there are several different, first of all, there are entities that manage the water, such as the Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District, etc. But we also have governmental oversight and participation in things like the block release from the Trinity. We have the Mad River, which is obviously something that's been affected by the closure of the pulp mills, and which was one of the biggest users of that water. So we actually have more water than we can use in the Mad River. Very, very different. It's actually like a microcosm of the state, in that the northern part of our county is flush with water, and the southern not so much. And the southern is where the eel comes in. So you can understand the passions behind the people of Humboldt County regarding that. But there are several entities, and I can't give you an actual rundown of which ones are involved, but the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors has representatives on all of those Klamath River discussions, Trinity River discussions, and now the eel as well. So
you said they had surplus water, which
they have surplus.
Yeah, Humboldt Bay Municipal
yeah.
Water District, and due to the pulp mills closing, there's a surplus.
Well, it's not really a surplus. There is no surplus of water. The water is a finite entity. It's a very large part of our planet, and it recycles itself however it does it through.
Well, I'm just
but I think that well, yeah, we had a real challenge when the pulp mills closed because because of their extensive use of water in the bay at the pulp mill. There were a lot of water rights attached, and the challenge when they closed was to retain those water rights and forestall a water grab from the inland section of the state. So that's the challenge they have. So again, back to the eel. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the discussion, and I want you to know that it's important for me to bring forward the concerns that in Humboldt County so that everybody has a clear idea of what we all bring to the table. Me, as a member of the Eel Russian River Commission, I understand very, very clearly the concerns of the Russian River, Sonoma, of the Potter Valley area, of Lake County and Lake Pillsbury, but I think it's important for everybody to understand what's on everybody's mind. With that, I'll either can go ahead and just provide direction or entertain a motion, either way. But I tend to think that we need to identify a pretty close time for some kind of a forum. I mean, either that or bring back the do we want to fine tune the JPA before we do that?
I would actually say that you and I are on an ad hoc for this.
Yes.
We've received input
Just
from the
go
board.
back.
Unless somebody wants to do something else, you know, what we could do is if it's the prerogative of the other commissioners, you know, Estelle and I could get together and plan out a couple different meetings. I think one meeting that we need to focus on is to make sure that we line up where the request for the RFO, request for offers come up, and make sure that we're in anticipation of that time so we can talk about what that means for us as a board and others. And then I think the other thing would be, you know, probably at a later date, is to figure out a time where we really talk about kind of this issue of getting back to basics, get all the people who are engaged to come out here, and then figure out. I really like the recommendation from Commissioner Steele in that item number 2 about committees and things, but the point there is that we can't break into that until we actually have the time or the desire to move. So getting back to that idea of statement of principles, if that's the same meeting, or if you and I think that should be a different meeting, because I think that'd be a good thing to also get in line before you leave office, quite honestly. I'd like to take advantage of the fact that, you know, we have something that we need to do relatively soon before the RFO goes out, but then we also have this other thing, which is a higher level statement of principles with an engaged group, and then we can decide based off of that, and we kind of have it'll set out our work plan for next year. So unless the other supervisors want something different, I would say you just take it as advisement, and we go back and come back to you all with a plan, and it'll be embedded into the future meeting schedules.
Yeah, so I think that it was fairly vague the first time around, but I think we have a lot more direction at this point to where we go. And you know, going back to your discussion, Commissioner Brown, with Chairman Hernandez, you know, it may be that we do, as we said before, decide to broaden, and then again, it's not up to us. If we did, we would have to send that out to all 4 counties and ask all 4 counties for their take on whether or not we want to open up the commission. And we might want to say something along the lines of does the county want to open up the commission as a blank statement, or does the county want to open up to inclusion of this member or that member? So those are maybe alternatives that we could also discuss as an ad hoc committee in terms of the process we would take if we want to go that direction. Okay.
You know, I'm in favor of that, but frame that question when you come back so that we can take something back that
Yes.
everybody does the same thing.
Exactly.
We'll
We'll give a couple of alternatives.
Yeah, I've been keeping my board briefed, but I told them I would bring something back for them to act on, and I don't have anything yet, but if you brought something back for them to act on, that'd be good.
Well, could the ad hoc meet sooner than later?
Oh, yeah.
And
we have to.
Yeah, and so that the clerk can send out, and we can make it available online, but send out whatever recommendation, whatever you put together. That way, we all have the same statement that is going back to our respective boards.
Yeah, definitely. So we can, Commissioner Gore and I can get together and try and make this happen sooner than later. And then, of course, the following question is, when is our next meeting as a commission? And we'll get to that, I guess, in our next agenda item. I think we've discussed this as far as we can take it at this point. And so we have our marching orders. I know it's busy, but I know that I will make sure to make time to meet and discuss with Commissioner Gore.
And then I feel we need to set approximate time, date,
to when we come back.
Place for our next meeting.
Yes, I'm going to, let me just, okay, just for the sake of process, that will come when we get to setting the next meeting. So I'm going to go on to item number 8, which is Commissioner reports. Do we have any reports?
Well, actually, I had put Representative Huffman's process for a report, that it's actually an ad hoc that's been meeting for public disclosure. And I was going to bring forth just information that our Representative Jared Huffman has an ad hoc, and I believe that Mr. Keller talked about it, as well as different ones here. So it's really already been covered. Okay. But that was it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Gore?
Yeah, I just wanted to address in the reports that there was a Public Record Act request that came to us that was, and I know the note that I saw from you was you know, it's a very expansive, it's a very wide net, and I respect any PRA. We deal with them every day, and I respect the request for that information. I went over into my calendars the specific dates about July 11th, August 4th, August 28th, October 3rd, October 6th, November 7th in 2017, January 29th in 2018, and you know, it's a request for any notes, information, texts, anything. You know, I'm open. I know that I think you requested back to the clerk, like, to give us guidance on what we're really pulling together. I don't really see anything in there from my standpoint that I'm going to submit, but I'm fully open to doing that. And I wanted to make sure that if you get any guidance from, since you're the chair and you're working through your clerk, that you have for us, that you provide that by mail so that we can appropriately respond to it. That's it.
Yes, and I would like to invite Curtis, Mr. Curtis, to give us an idea of what we have planned on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christian Curtis, Assistant County Counsel for the County of Mendocino. I just wanted to let the Commission know I am working with the clerk in terms of responding. You know, we do want to be consistent in terms of identifying the appropriate materials to be providing. So we will be following up through the clerk to go ahead and work with the commissioners in terms of getting any materials that would be responsive to the request and getting an appropriate response out. And I've already been talking to the attorney, Mr. Bundy, who had sent in the the request just in terms of some clarification and making sure that we're understanding the nature of what it is that they are looking for.
And the PRA request, because I haven't seen that email yet, requesting information, is from what group?
Sorry, this is from Friends of the Eel River through their attorney, Mr. Bundy.
Okay.
Yeah, question. It's all well and good to say, here's the PRA and tell us what you know. But what really I need as guidance from you is your level of effort that you expect from me and search engines, that sort of thing. If you'll do that so I know that I've done the things in the proper parameters, then I'll feel more comfortable, because if I miss one that somebody else did and they catch me missing it, I'm not going to be comfortable with that, because I take the PRA very seriously.
Yes, and through the chair, that is the intent, is to make sure that no one's missing any appropriate search terms, and that they are being done in a way that will help all of the commissioners identify everything that should be provided.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your help with this. Okay, I did, as I said earlier, through the privilege of the chair, I read out Humboldt's.
Take your privilege.
I read out Humboldt's thing, so I think that's my report. I guess I can report that Humboldt is very interested and becoming more interested all the while. So I intend to keep you very informed on what we're dealing with up there. We called out the Wiyot tribe, but also we'll let you know that, and as you pointed out, Commissioner Gore, there's all sorts of stakeholders, including some of the small towns along the Eel, Scotia, Riodell, Fortuna, Ferndale, etc. So just so you know, I'll be keeping in touch with them, and we've been having a good discussion. So on to other business, which is
Commissioner Fennell, can I just add one thing? There was one other thing I was going to mention. I apologize. So one was what I already said, but the second one is, I mean this in a very good way. Don't be surprised if we consider doing resolutions of our own. Let's say from like Sonoma County. I think that was one of the things that I thought was positive about the first meeting I did go to, the what we call the Huffman meeting, was that there was this kind of statement of where you're at. I haven't gone to those meetings sequentially to understand if they're providing value or not. It's good to hear that they're talking about a two-basin solution. But the thing that started, if we do a resolution, it's like, here's what's important to us. And what I respect about your resolution is it wasn't just like, it's not like throwing your flag in the sand, putting it in the sand and saying this is mine. It's like, here's why it's important to us. Here's what it is. So what I would encourage is, if there's going to be a resolution from some of our other entities, is we put that time and effort into it to talk about the value of science, as you put into it, the value of two basins, the value of coming in. But that could be something that's good that we have from our different areas. I mean, I've heard you anecdotally state about how, I don't mean flippantly, but I mean, I've heard you talk about the value of Pillsbury. I know we have somebody from the Homeowners Association here. It'd be important to know what's important to each other. So, good leadership.
I would just thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Gore. I mean, I would invite and think it would be very appropriate for you to go to your boards and see if you can come up with a policy statement as well, so we can stack them in there as members of the commission.
Yeah, let me add from us, I did go to the Eel River, Huffman's Eel River Commission hearings, and I've been trying to keep up with it along with everything else. But when I do go, I keep coming down with the same flu. I look at it and I say, it looks like they're being very narrow and they're driving the answer by virtue of the questions. And that's not the approach that I'd like to see taken. So that's a criticism of them, and I made it publicly, and then I sent them a letter afterwards saying, I think you ought to take this approach. And my continuing to go to those meetings will depend on how they respond to my my question. From my standpoint, you don't just say fish passage, you say life history cycle of the fish throughout the whole system, because that takes away that focus on passage and then taking passage out, because that's the only answer you can have. So anyway, I sent those questions in, so that was my part. And then from the standpoint of the board, I will certainly brief them at the next time and ask them if they want to put this on the active agenda. I am the chair. But I'm also on the board of directors for RCRC and the board of directors for CSACT, and I bring these things up in those places as well. That's very, very important to me. From the standpoint of the dams and the headwaters, they have to look at those things differently than just being recreational values, and that's what, for instance, that Huffman has on his agenda, that for Lake County, Pillsbury is recreational. No, really, you've got to look at it as the headwaters. It's recharging your groundwaters. It's creating late summer water for your fish. It's doing a lot of things that you have to give it credit for. And you can maybe do it a different way and take that dam down and do it in a different way, but you really have to think about it going forward in the new climatology. We're really in a different climate regime, and you have to do it in such a way that you have some control over on those things that take the water out of the system. And there have been some people sneak in to take water that maybe we should start looking at as well. So with all that said, and as far as my report is, I'm here for what you folks want me to do. I'm 6 more months, and then I'm moving on.
And you
so we'd better have our meeting before 6 months runs out.
And you just brought up something important. So for disclosure, all 4 Eel Russian River commissioners sit on the CSAC, County State Association Board of Directors. And we did have a meeting in May. And David, we didn't sit next to each other. And no, nothing was brought up about the Eel River where we would have to vacate the room.
I ran every time I saw you guys.
I know, you were going like this.
It's okay if you
just we're talking about
to each other, as long as you don't talk business, it's fine.
It is true.
It is true.
It's
very true. Very true.
Yeah, it's good to know that distinction.
But board meeting is talking business. It's also talking legislation and lots of other issues. But nothing was focused on us, and it's just better we don't because it's perception.
Yeah. Speaking, we were talking a little bit more about this Huffman group. The last meeting, there was a representative from Assemblyman Wood's office there, and I have asked that Senator McGuire's office also attend those meetings, and Jason Lyles was here today, and I think that we'll see some participation from the state side as well as the federal. So, this is a big issue, and I think we all need to be involved, and it's great. So, on to other business. For the umpteenth time, the selection of the Lake County alternate. Any word on that, Commissioners? No word. Okay. We will continue.
You find someone interested. I will make another attempt. We had an election, and it's kind of driven the process a little bit, so I will make another attempt.
Okay.
Yeah. It's tough. This is actually a tough commission to want to belong to. And still be close to the situation. I probably will go to South County and ask them if they want to get involved.
So with that, we're on to public expression. The commission limits, this is for basically items that are not on the agenda. And it's meant for people who can sit through a very long meeting and still have something on their mind that we didn't discuss. But for items that are not on the agenda, this is your moment to give us 3 minutes of your ideas or thoughts for items not on the agenda.
Hi, John LaBoito again. Everything was on the agenda, so I mean, what can I say? I want to speak a little outside the box here. If we were going to set out to build a hydroelectric project today, we do it a lot differently than this project. For one thing, we'd put the power plant down at the headwaters of Lake Mendocino in order to utilize the entire fall all the way from Von Arsdale Reservoir with the pipeline through Potter Valley, probably generate twice the amount of power with the same amount of water, even a little less amount of water. The pipeline through Potter Valley would address the little issue they have of sometimes too much groundwater. And inhibits certain agricultural crops. we certainly would never build a dam without a provision for fish migration. So I think that I look at you guys and I say, well, you are the representatives of all the major stakeholders in this project, you and the tribes who are also involved with this. And so I'm asking myself, can all of your counties find enough common ground to be able to stand up and say, this project is a dinosaur and we need to fix it? And we, as a group, all 4 counties, the tribes together, whether it's Jared Huffman's process, whoever it is, will seek a joint public and private funding for a major redesign and overhaul of the project that will, and that's the only way that I can think that all of the interests are going to get what they need out of this. Is if we actually commit ourselves to the fact that this really shouldn't go on like this, and we need to fix it, and find the money to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward.
Vivian Hallowell, I have a little process question for the Eel Russian River Commission, and that is like, how do you deal with a tie vote when there are only 4 of you and not an odd number? And do you require a 3 minimum vote in order to pass a subject to pass a vote? And before you answer that question or try to, what the gentleman was saying about this project, Potter Valley project would never today be built the way it is without fish passage. And National Marine Fisheries Service is the one who's wanting fish passage to those upper waters. A lot of things have changed in the Eel River. Watersheds that supported a lot of spawning are going dry. Tonkai Creek, Outlook Creek, 10 Mile Creek, and the stretch between the dams is not doing so well. It's reported to us from the surveyors of the salmon there. So all things to consider, as well as other aspects of life cycle approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other input? I think I have an answer for your question, but I must hear other input first. Any further public comment on items not in the agenda? Okay, bringing back to the commission, Commissioner.
Oh, I was just going to say, Vivian, we don't take actions. Or really haven't, except support by letter, maybe legislation, support restoration projects that are going after grant funding. That we have, but for the most part, we really don't take action on items.
Well,
and that's
haven't,
true too.
But I will say that there are rules here in terms of what deems a quorum, and if we also if we don't have a quorum, we have an alternate. So each county has an alternate, which is why we would love Lake County to have one too. But that there are actually provisions in the JPA on the voting structure.
Madam Chair, if I may, I would just draw your attention to section 4.06 of the JPA agreement on page 7. It does indicate that there would be a 3-member affirmative vote.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I have it highlighted. Thank you very much. Yay! Thank you very much. Any further? Okay, so let's get to the final decision point here, and that is our next meeting. It seems to me that we really need to get together sooner than later. We're now in June. We've heard discussions of significant issues happening in August, potentially September. We recognize ourselves as a body, a public body that can discuss all of these issues. So can we get together in July? It's a tough time, but and Carla's okay, how about August? August is August.
How about August 3rd, that Friday?
That might be my vacation, but
what was wrong with July? Why did we go past it?
Because
it's because
my
staff
clerk
looked
of
at
the
you.
board
Because
said-
nobody
Did
jumped
she
up
give
with
you the
blame.
evil eye
She
that
gave
I
you
just
the
saw earlier?
stink eye.
Yeah, okay, snake eye, all right.
Yeah, okay.
So we got this
Please
thing.
don't do that eye.
Okay, August.
Okay, so
August
I'm in
3rd works.
And that's too early for me. I'm going to actually, it's going to have to go to the 3rd week of August. Sorry. Ooh,
Yeah,
wait
yeah.
a second. Yeah, it is the 3rd week. There's actually the Potter Valley.
Friday the
work-
17th?
You have an RCRC board meeting anyone else on RCRC? Yeah, 2 of you? So all 3 of us.
I'm an alternate.
So we're going to have a board meeting. We'll be traveling twice. Just if it makes any difference to you, I travel all the time, so it doesn't make any difference to me.
In August, we're
In
having.
August, yeah. 15th.
So let's go to the 3rd week. It doesn't always have to be a Friday, but is that a better day for everybody?
It's my better day.
Yeah. Do we want to say August 24th?
Although that particular week, I do have the 22nd that's light for some reason. Right now.
I think I could do the 22nd.
I could do the 22nd.
That's a Wednesday.
Yeah.
How about you, Commissioner Brown?
Not sure.
Wednesday, August 22nd.
Where?
Oh,
Yeah,
where's
where?
our next one?
You wanna go to
It's
Lake
supposed
County?
to be Sonoma County,
Yeah.
but Lake County, I think Commissioner Steele has said there really isn't an appropriate place, or do
Well,
you
yeah,
wanna
if you're
find
gonna
one?
if you're gonna want to be near, do we have anybody left from the lake here in Pillsbury? Is there a room out there to meet in?
Frank's
That-
house.
Yeah, that's the reaction, yeah, that I have to it. There's really no room, and no one can get to it. I mean, it's a drive on a dirt road, you know.
Tallman Hotel.
This
Oh, the
Sonoma
Tallman.
then?
Well,
But
yeah.
but Commissioner Steele, I wouldn't mind meeting in your if you can get your boardroom.
Oh, we can get the boardroom.
It would be helpful maybe for you to get somebody to. I mean, if you're trying to get an alternate or have these other discussions, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we
Put
can
the
host
arm
it.
on
In,
it.
we can host it in Sonoma. That's not a problem. It's just an offer.
Well, if everybody wants to travel to Lake County, you know that Tallman, I could ask. They're very civic-minded, and it's a small room, but I don't know that we'll have very many people. Any other way is, of course, would be the board chambers, and let's do it up there and then see what I can do.
So Lake County,
Lake
Wednesday,
County.
August.
Yeah, Lake County
August
would be kind of
26th.
fun.
Okay.
Does Upper Lake have a Grange building?
It does. We could do the Grange. You can see our rustic look in Lake County.
But that, I was trying to think. I think it's right there on 20.
There's nothing
It's
along
on
it,
Government
yeah.
Street.
Oh, on Government.
Government Street's interesting. It's 1 block long. It's true. That's how much government we have, you know, it's just 1 block square. But the
Just
Grange
enough room
Little
for
Rustic could be
parking.
kind of fun. They would enjoy that.
You're fun.
Might be
Okay.
more fun than the board chambers. I see too much of that myself. But
Not the truth.
I don't know that anybody could hear us, but
I
we could
bet.
sure give something to try. Let me see what I can do. We'll be creative. Maybe I can have some scones for you. It'll be all kind of fun.
Okay. Alrighty. Or we could, take a boat out onto the lake.
That would be fun to cook.
Yeah. Okay,
We'd have to
guys.
take the public. That's the only
Thank
thing.
you all very, very much. Our meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, thank you.